Welcome back to another story on Watch Harry. This time, we're bringing you, what if Harry took a Gringotts blood oath at age 6 and became heir to 15 foundational houses and emperor? Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Oath of Dust and Gold. The cupboard under the stairs was 3 feet wide and 6 feet long, and Harry Potter had memorized every splinter in its walls. He knew which board creaked second from the left when Aunt Petunia walked to the kitchen at 5 in the morning. He knew the exact angle the light came through the slats at noon in July, thin and golden and useless. He knew the smell of the place, dust and old shoes and something faintly damp that never quite went away no matter how dry the summer got. He knew it the way you only know a place when you've spent years with nothing else to look at. What he didn't know, had never known, was why. Why the cupboard? Why the Dursleys? Why, when he'd asked Aunt Petunia once, just once, age 4, still young enough to think asking might work, why he lived in there while Dudley had a whole bedroom plus a second bedroom just for his toys, she'd looked at him with that particular expression she saved only for him. Not anger. Not guilt. Something worse. The look of someone who has decided, firmly and finally, that a problem is not their problem. He'd stopped asking after that. At 6 years old, Harry Potter had developed 2 skills to a degree that would have impressed people had anyone been paying attention. He was extraordinarily good at going unnoticed, and he was extraordinarily good at noticing everything else. He noticed, for instance, that on the 3rd Tuesday of every month, Uncle Vernon left the car keys on the kitchen counter instead of hanging them by the door. He noticed that Dudley's gang always split up at the corner of Magnolia Road, which meant if you turned left instead of right you had a clear 30-second window. He noticed that Mrs. Fig, who smelled of cats and cabbage and watched him sometimes on weekends, always looked away from him with a specific kind of deliberate effort, the effort of someone who had been told not to look too closely. He filed these things away the way other children collected football cards. Neatly. Purposefully. Against future need. The summer he turned 6 was the summer of the letters. Not the Hogwarts letters, those were 5 years away yet. These were different. They came for 3 days running, slipping through the mail slot with a sound like whispered arguments, each one addressed in handwriting that wasn't quite like any handwriting Harry had seen in Dudley's school books. Looping and precise at once, like someone had taught calligraphy to a river. Uncle Vernon burned them in the kitchen sink before Harry could read them, but on the 3rd morning Harry had been awake since 4 and he'd gotten to the mail slot first. The envelope was thick. Heavier than paper had any right to be. The wax seal on the back was black and showed a symbol he didn't recognize, an intricate knotwork of what looked like a snake eating itself, enclosed in a circle, enclosed in a crown. He turned it over and read his name. Harry James Potter. The cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He stood in the hallway in his 2 big pajamas with the fraying cuffs and looked at those words for a long time. The cupboard under the stairs. Whoever had written this knew exactly where he slept. Whoever had written this had been precise about it, had not written the house or the bedroom but the specific, particular, deliberate cupboard, as if they wanted him to know that they knew. Uncle Vernon came down the stairs at 6:45 and found the mail slot empty and Harry already back in his cupboard, eating the heel of bread he'd saved from last night's dinner. The letter was tucked inside the loose board behind his left shoulder, the one that had been loose since before Harry could remember. He didn't tell the Dursleys about it. He thought about it for 2 days instead. The symbol on the seal. The weight of the paper. The way his scar, the lightning bolt scar he'd had since before he could remember, the one Aunt Petunia said came from the car crash that killed his parents, had given off a single, strange pulse of warmth the moment his fingers touched the wax. Not painful. Almost like recognition. Like something in his blood going, oh, there you are. On the 3rd day, he made a decision. He waited until Aunt Petunia took Dudley to his weekly swimming lesson. Uncle Vernon was at work. Mrs. Fig was, for once, not visibly watching the house from her garden. Harry put on his least oversized shirt, still oversized, still Dudley's, but at least it didn't hang to his knees, and he walked out the front door and he didn't look back. He'd seen Gringotts once. Dudley had gotten a book of London for his birthday that he'd never opened, and Harry had found it under Dudley's bed during one of his rare forays into the upper floor and memorized the relevant pages before replacing it exactly. He knew the tube line. He knew the station. He knew that Gringotts was in Diagon Alley, and he knew, from a brief, overheard conversation between Uncle Vernon and a man at a petrol station who'd been dressed in a peculiar cloak, that Diagon Alley was accessed through the leaky cauldron on Charing Cross Road. What he didn't know was how a 6-year-old with no money gets from Surrey to central London. As it turned out, carefully, creatively, and by hiding in the luggage rack of a National Rail carriage for 45 minutes while trying very hard not to sneeze. London smelled like exhaust and rain and something older underneath both of those things, something that got stronger the closer he walked to Charing Cross Road. Like iron and candle wax and earth that hadn't seen the sun in a long time. Harry followed the smell the way you follow music through a crowd, not knowing quite where it's coming from but certain you're getting warmer. The leaky cauldron looked like nothing from the outside. That was the honest truth of it. It looked like a gap between buildings, like the kind of place your eye slid off of. But Harry had spent 6 years learning to see things other people's eyes slid off of, and he pushed the door open and walked in. The inside smelled like the outside but more so. Dark wood and firelight and something being cooked that wasn't quite any food Harry could name. A handful of people in odd clothing looked up when the door opened. Several of them looked back down immediately. One old woman in a purple hat stared at his forehead for 3 full seconds before catching herself. Harry walked to the barman, a hunchbacked old man with no hair and kind enough eyes, and said, in a voice he kept very steady, "I need to get to Diagon Alley, please." The barman looked at him. Looked at his forehead. Then, without a word, walked him to the back courtyard and tapped 3 bricks in a pattern that made the wall fold away like it had been waiting for exactly this. Harry watched with careful eyes, counting the bricks, memorizing the pattern. 3rd brick up, 2nd across. Then 2 left. Then 1 down. He said thank you and walked through. Diagon Alley was, a lot. Harry had a good imagination. He'd had to develop one, 6 years in a cupboard. But Diagon Alley defeated imagination because it wasn't built on any logic imagination had access to. Shops that appeared to be larger inside than outside. A broomstick in a window that was slowly rotating on its own with an expression of pride. A cat sleeping in a potion ingredients display whose fur was cycling slowly through colors. People in robes of every shade, talking too fast, carrying things that shouldn't be carryable, completely unbothered by all of it. Harry walked through it with his hands in his 2 big pockets and his eyes moving constantly, and he felt, for the first time in his conscious memory, something close to right. Like a word you've been trying to remember suddenly arriving. Like a key in a lock. He didn't stop to look at anything. He walked straight to the white marble building at the end of the alley, which was taller than everything around it and colder looking, and he walked up the broad steps past 2 goblins in uniforms who watched him with amber eyes that gave nothing away, and he pushed open the bronze door and went inside. Gringotts Bank smelled like stone and old magic and money in a way that had nothing to do with any currency Harry knew. The entrance hall was vast and tiered, with dozens of goblins working at high counters along the walls, the scratch of quill on parchment and the clink of coin constant as rainfall. Chandeliers burned overhead with a cold, blue-white light that made everyone look slightly more serious than they probably were. Harry stood in the entrance and took it all in for approximately 4 seconds. Then he walked to the nearest counter. The goblin behind it was ancient in a way that was different from how old humans looked. Human age wore people down, softened them, turned them papery and slow. Goblin age seemed to do the opposite, to concentrate them, compress them, like something being refined. This one had skin the color of old parchment and eyes that were completely, unsettlingly gold. His hands on the counter were still, which Harry noticed because goblin hands were almost never still. He was looking at Harry with an expression that wasn't surprise but was something adjacent to it. Something that had been waiting for surprise and was now having it confirmed. "You are earlier than expected," the goblin said. His voice was like gravel being poured very carefully. "By approximately 4 years and 7 months. Harry looked at him. "You were expecting me?" "Not I." The goblin stepped down from behind his counter with a slowness that was clearly chosen rather than required. He was shorter than Harry, which was saying something at 6 years old, but he carried himself like height was a concept invented by lesser beings. Ragnarok the Ancient. Director Emeritus. He has been expecting something. He said he would know it when it came. The goblin paused. He said it would come when it was ready, not when it was summoned. This appears to have been accurate. Who is Ragnarok? Old, the goblin said simply. Come. Harry followed him. They went through a door behind the main counters that Harry doubted most visitors ever saw, down a corridor cut from raw stone that descended at a slight angle, lit by sconces that held no fire but emitted a steady amber glow. The temperature dropped as they walked. The sound of the main hall faded. Harry counted doors, 12, and the distance between them and the ceiling above and the way the stone changed color in bands, darker layers alternating with lighter ones, recording history the way cliffs record time. The goblin stopped at a door that was smaller than the others. There was no handle. There was a mark on the door that was similar to the seal on Harry's letter, the same knotwork, the same crown, but here the snake in the center was actively moving, circling slowly, watching. The goblin looked at Harry's right hand. Your palm, he said. Harry offered it without question, which seemed to surprise the goblin slightly. He pressed Harry's palm flat against the door's surface. The stone was cold for exactly 1 second, and then it was the precise temperature of Harry's own blood, and the snake on the door went still, and the door opened. The room inside was circular and small and smelled of very old things. The floor was stone. The ceiling was domed, covered in runes Harry couldn't read yet but felt against the back of his mind like words in a language he used to know. At the center of the room was a low stone table, and at the far side of the table, in a chair that was sized for a being much larger than he was, sat the most ancient creature Harry had ever seen. Ragnarok the Ancient was not well. That was clear immediately and completely. His skin had the quality of something very fine that had been folded too many times. His hands on the arms of the chair were gnarled past functionality. He wasn't going to be writing with those hands, or holding a quill, or doing much of anything except existing with great concentration. His eyes, though. His eyes were the amber of the other goblins but richer, darker, like amber that had had 1,000 years to deepen. And when they landed on Harry, they went very, very still. Ah, said Ragnarok. Just that. The younger goblin said something in gobbledygook and withdrew, pulling the door shut behind him. Harry stood across the stone table from Ragnarok in a room carved out of the bones of London and studied the old goblin the way he'd learned to study everything, looking for the thing underneath the surface, the structural truth. What he saw was, a being in the final chapter of a very long life, sitting with the specific quality of someone who has resolved themselves to their ending but has one piece of unfinished business. The unfinished business, apparently, was Harry. Sit, Ragnarok said, and gestured at the stone opposite him with a hand that moved like it cost something. Harry sat. You came alone, Ragnarok said. It wasn't a question, but there was something approving in it. Yes. No adult knows you're here. No. How did you get to London? Train, Harry said. I hid. Ragnarok made a sound that might have been a laugh, filtered through decades of disuse. How old are you, boy? 6.5. You received a letter. 3 letters, Harry said. My uncle burned the first 2. Yes. We sent them to gauge responses. The burning was expected. The 3rd we sent knowing it would reach you. We altered the delivery to ensure it. Ragnarok's gold eyes hadn't moved from Harry's face. You read it. I read my name and address. My uncle hadn't come down yet and I heard him on the stairs and I hid it. You didn't open it? Not yet, Harry said. I wanted to come here first. There was a silence in the room that felt intentional. Ragnarok was looking at him with an expression Harry couldn't fully parse, something between assessment and something older than assessment. Do you know what you are? Ragnarok asked finally. A wizard, Harry said. I think. Things happen around me. When I'm angry or scared, things move or change or break. My aunt says it's not normal, but she says a lot of things that aren't true, so I don't weight her opinion very heavily. Ragnarok made the sound again. Definitely a laugh this time. You are a wizard, yes. But that is like saying the ocean is wet. Accurate, and almost entirely insufficient. He shifted in the great chair, and the effort of it was visible in a way that made Harry keep his expression carefully neutral. Ragnarok didn't want pity, that was obvious, and Harry respected that, because he didn't want pity either. Do you know what Gringotts does, boy? Beyond the obvious. You hold money, Harry said. And vaults. And you're goblins, which means the 1752 Treaty of Reciprocal Sovereignty applies, which means you're not subject to ministry magical law in matters of goblin custom and banking practice. The silence this time was different in quality. Where did you read that? Ragnarok asked. I didn't, Harry said. I figured it out. From what I could gather about wizard politics from my uncle's conversations and from a magazine I found at Mrs. Figg's house. It was called The Practical Wand and it was mostly about cauldron cleaning, but it had an article about goblin banking disputes in 1987 and I worked backwards. He paused. Was I wrong? You were entirely correct, Ragnarok said. And something in his expression shifted, settled. As if a question he'd been carrying for a very long time had just been answered. Gringotts does more than hold vaults, yes. We are keepers of magical lineage. Guardians of blood records that predate your ministry by 2,000 years. We track inheritance, we certify heredity, we conduct rites that transfer, legitimately, irrevocably, under laws older than any government currently operating on this island, magical titles, lordships, and legacies. He paused. We also, on very rare occasions, conduct what is called a fundament blood oath. An inheritance right reserved for cases where bloodlines of extreme age and power have gone dormant, where the magic of a house has no heir, is pooling, accumulating, and beginning to strain the boundaries of the containment we place around it. Harry was very still. There are currently, Ragnarok continued, 15 such houses. The room felt smaller suddenly. Not in a bad way. In the way a room feels smaller when it's full of something important. 15 is a great many, Harry said. It is unprecedented, Ragnarok said flatly. It has never happened before in recorded goblin history that 15 foundational houses fell dormant simultaneously. It took 900 years. They did not all go dark at once, it was gradual, a dynasty ending here, a line dying there. But the accumulation, he paused, and Harry saw something that might have been pain cross the old goblin's face, not physical. The other kind. The accumulation of dormant power has become dangerous. Several of the containment vaults are beginning to fracture. The magic wants out. It wants an heir. It has been wanting one for a very long time. And you think I should be that heir, Harry said. I think, Ragnarok said carefully, that the blood resonance you emitted when you touched that door is the strongest spontaneous hereditary signal our instruments have recorded in 400 years. I think that your magical core, at age 6, with no training and no nutrition worth mentioning, his eyes moved briefly over Harry's thin frame with something that was absolutely not pity but was something adjacent to fury, is already pulling against its own boundaries. I think that you are not simply descended from one or two of these houses, boy. I think you are the convergence point. The place where 15 rivers have been flowing toward for 9 centuries. He stopped. I also think, he added, that I am dying. Harry didn't say I'm sorry because Ragnarok wouldn't want it. He said, how long? A month. Perhaps 2 if I am stubborn, which I have been told is likely. A ghost of something. I have held this responsibility for 60 years, the guardianship of these dormant houses, the maintenance of their containment, the search for an heir that our record suggested was coming. I will not die leaving it unresolved. The rite requires a living goblin elder of sufficient rank as witness and conduit. After me, there are none qualified. He met Harry's eyes. I am asking you to trust me. I'm listening, Harry said. Tell me what the rite involves first. The ghost of something became slightly more definite. You are 6 years old. You just told me I'm a convergence point for 900 years of accumulated magical legacy, Harry said reasonably. I think I'm allowed to ask questions before agreeing to things. Ragnarok told him. The blood oath of fundament, tessara sanguinum, in the old tongue, was not complicated in concept and was enormously complicated in execution. In concept, Harry's blood, given willingly and with full conscious intent, would be brought into contact with the recorded blood seals of each of the 15 dormant houses. The magic of each house would assess him, not judge him. Ragnarok was careful to distinguish, assess him, check the hereditary resonance, confirm the fit. If all 15 accepted, the oath would bind. The power, the titles, the magical legacies of 15 foundational dynasties would channel into Harry's bloodline and settle there, permanently and irrevocably. In execution, it would take several hours, it would be painful in the way that any significant magical working was painful, and the moment it was complete Harry would, legally and magically and in every way that the oldest laws of the magical world recognized, become the sole heir and holder of 15 ancient houses. Including their political authority. Including their accumulated power. Including a title that had last been held, theoretically, never actually claimed, when all 15 houses had been simultaneously alive, Imperator Magicus. The magical emperor. Harry sat with all of this for a moment. Will it hurt you? He asked. The right. Given your condition. Ragnarok looked at him. Yes, he said. It will likely end me sooner. And you're willing to do it anyway. It is my purpose, Ragnarok said simply. Harry nodded once. Then yes, he said. I'll do it. The preparation took the better part of an hour. 2 other goblins entered the room, silent, efficient, moving with the careful precision of people performing a ceremony they had trained for but never expected to actually execute. They brought items, a stone basin carved with runes so dense the stone looked more text than rock, 15 sealed vials of dark red substance that was clearly old blood preserved by magic, a ceremonial knife with a blade of something that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite stone, incense that burned with a smoke so blue it was almost black, and a rolled parchment that, when unrolled, covered most of the stone table and was covered in text in at least 4 languages. Harry read what he could while the preparations were made. Latin he could parse partially. English he could read fully. The other 2 he couldn't, but he memorized the shapes of the words. Ragnarok explained each element as it was set in place, and Harry noticed that the old goblin was slightly surprised each time he asked a follow-up question that went exactly to the heart of the relevant mechanism. He wasn't performing intelligence for Ragnarok's benefit. He was genuinely trying to understand what was going to happen to him, because he'd learned young that understanding was armor, and he preferred not to go into things unarmored. When everything was ready, the 2 assisting goblins took positions at opposite sides of the room. Ragnarok rose from his chair with effort and stood at the far side of the basin. Harry stood at the near side. The blue-black smoke coiled between them. There is one more thing, Ragnarok said. His voice had changed, not in tone but in weight. More formal. More final. The oath asks for consent. Not implied, not assumed. Spoken, in your own words, with full understanding. Once spoken, nothing in this world can unmake it. Not the Ministry. Not Dumbledore. Not any power currently walking this earth. His gold eyes were steady. Do you understand what you are consenting to? I'm consenting to inherit the magical legacy, political authority, and hereditary titles of 15 foundational houses, Harry said clearly, and to hold them for the duration of my life with the responsibilities that come with them. And the title of Imperator. And the title of Imperator. Say it, Ragnarok said. In your own words. From your intent. Not from repetition. Harry looked at the basin. He looked at the 15 sealed vials, each one containing the last preserved blood of a dynasty. He thought about the cupboard. About Aunt Petunia's expression. About the letter that knew exactly which cupboard he slept in and had come to find him anyway. About the warmth his scar had given off when he'd touched the seal. He said, I, Harry James Potter, give my blood and my intent freely and without coercion to the fundament blood oath. I accept the inheritance of the 15 foundational houses and everything that comes with it. I'll be responsible with it. I won't waste it. He paused. And I won't let it be taken from me. The last line wasn't in any script. He added it because it was true. The blue-black smoke surged upward. Ragnarok broke the seals on all 15 vials simultaneously. Harry didn't see how he did it, whether by magic or mechanism, because in the same moment the ceremonial knife was in Harry's right hand and he understood without being told what came next. He drew the blade across his left palm with a steady hand and held it over the basin and let his blood fall into the old blood already pooling there. The pain started immediately. Not in his hand. Everywhere else. It started as heat, the warmth his scar had given off, but multiplied by something that had no arithmetic equivalent, and then it became something more structural, like the sensation of a building being added to, floor by floor, each new floor coming with its own pressure and its own weight settling into the foundations. Harry stood straight and kept his hand extended over the basin and breathed through it, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way he'd taught himself to breathe through hunger and cold and the particular misery of Dudley's birthdays. The blood in the basin moved. Not randomly, with intention. The 15 separated components found his blood and each one reacted differently, one surged toward it like a tide, one circled it 3 times before folding in, one hung back and then committed all at once with a force that made the stone table shudder. Harry felt each contact as a separate event. 15 separate events. 15 separate moments of something vast and ancient turning its attention fully toward him and making a decision. The 6th was Slytherin's line, and when that blood touched his, the Parseltongue came alive, not as a sound but as a knowing, a sudden comprehension of a layer of language that had always been there under everything, like a frequency he'd never been tuned to before. The 9th was Gryffindor's, and what hit him then wasn't power in any sense he had words for, it was closer to command, to an absolute bone-deep certainty about forward motion, about the mechanics of courage not as a feeling but as a choice made before the feeling arrives. The 13th was Merlin's line. Harry stopped breathing for approximately 4 seconds after the 13th. Then he breathed again. By the 15th, the basin was glowing with a light that was white at the center and gold at the edges and had no mundane explanation. Ragnarok was speaking in gobbledygook, low and fast and rhythmic, and the 2 attending goblins had pressed themselves flat against the walls with expressions Harry would only later be able to read as awe. The light rose from the basin and moved toward Harry in a column that hit his chest and went in, and the pain peaked, not unbearable, he decided, just enormous, like being the space something enormous was passing through, and then it broke, like a wave, and settled. Silence. Harry lowered his hand. His palm had already stopped bleeding. The cut was already gone, sealed not with a scar but with a thin line of gold that faded to nothing as he watched. He looked up. Ragnarok was gripping the edge of the stone table with both gnarled hands. His face was, Harry searched for the word. Finished. Not in the destroyed sense. In the completed sense. A long task arrived at its last step. It is done, Ragnarok said. His voice was barely more than a whisper now, but there was nothing frail about it. All 15 accepted. The resonance was, he stopped. Then, I have never seen all 15 accept in under a minute. Usually the assessment alone takes several hours. They recognized me, Harry said. It wasn't arrogance. It was just what had happened. He'd felt it, each one, in turn, not evaluating him as a stranger but recognizing him as something that had always been coming. They did, Ragnarok confirmed. The Imperator title is now yours in full. The Goblin Nation recognizes it. We are bound by the Treaty of Fundament, older than the 1752 Treaty, older than Hogwarts, to acknowledge the Imperator's authority in matters pertaining to the 15 houses and all territories and persons historically sworn to them. He paused. A not inconsiderable portion of magical Britain. Harry looked down at his hands. His right hand had a faint tracery of gold lines at the knuckles that he suspected would be visible for a while yet. He felt different, more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, Letters and Lions. The gold lines faded by the time he got back to Surrey. Not completely, in certain lights, at certain angles, the tracery was still visible along his knuckles, thin as spider silk and twice as strong. But to a casual observer, to Aunt Petunia's darting, suspicious eyes, Harry's hands looked like they always had. Small. Slightly scarred from kitchen accidents. Unremarkable. Harry was very good at looking unremarkable. The 5 years between the blood oath and the Hogwarts letter were, on the surface, entirely quiet. The Dursleys noticed nothing. Why would they? He still slept in the cupboard. He still cooked breakfast and pulled weeds and was generally invisible in the way they preferred him to be. He was still small for his age, still wore Dudley's cast-off clothes, still sat in the back corner of every classroom at St. Grunning's Primary and watched everything and said very little. Underneath, something was changing constantly. The magical legacies had settled into him gradually, the way deep roots settle into soil, not all at once but with a thoroughness that went right to the bedrock. He'd spent the first year simply listening to what was new in him, cataloguing it the way he catalogued everything. The Parseltongue was the most immediately obvious. Language had always come easily to Harry, but Parseltongue wasn't learned, it was known, complete and entire, like a room he'd always had the key to but had never found the door for. He practiced on the garden snake that lived under the Dursleys' porch, who turned out to be deeply opinionated about the neighborhood cats and happy to have an audience. The runic knowledge from Ravenclaw's line arrived more slowly, seeping in over months, surfacing in dreams and in the odd moments just before sleep when his mind was quiet enough to hear it. He borrowed books from the school library, history, mythology, Old English, Norse legend, and found that the academic frameworks humans had built around magical subjects were thin and inexact but pointed toward real things, the way shadows pointed toward objects. He followed the shadows. The battle sense from Gryffindor's line was the strangest inheritance. It didn't feel like knowledge or language. It felt like an extra sense, a spatial awareness that had nothing to do with his eyes, a constant, low-level reading of his environment, tracking angles and distances and the weight distribution of everyone in any room he entered. It made him an excellent dodgeball player, which occasionally alarmed his teachers, and it made Dudley's gang give up chasing him with an efficiency that might have seemed cruel from the outside but was, Harry thought, perfectly reasonable given the circumstances. The Merlin inheritance he still didn't fully understand. It sat deepest, warmest, most patient. He'd touch it sometimes in the way you touch a wall in the dark to check it's still there. It was always there. Waiting. The morning the Hogwarts letters arrived, Harry had been awake for 2 hours already. He'd felt something building for the past week, a kind of anticipatory pressure in the air, like the world holding a breath. He'd spent the week rereading the letter Ragnarok had sent him after the oath, delivered through Gringotts' private owl network to Mrs. Figg's address and collected during one of his Saturday visits. The letter outlined, in precise goblin legalese, the immediate practical implications of the oath. The 15 vaults were now accessible to him. The political titles were registered in the goblin records and had been formally notified to the letter's phrasing here was fastidiously neutral, relevant parties in the magical governance structure. The Goblin Nation's liaison for foundational house affairs, a goblin named Sharpfang, was available at Gringotts whenever Harry wished to discuss the practicalities. There was a postscript in different handwriting. Shakier. He did well, it said. Just that. In Ragnarok's hand. The old goblin had died 11 days after the oath. Harry had found out from Sharpfang during his second Gringotts visit, conducted with the same careful independence as the first. He'd stood in Sharpfang's office and processed this information with his expression neutral, and then he'd said, "Did he finish his business?" And Sharpfang had said he did, and Harry had nodded and said good and had meant it in the way Ragnarok would have wanted it to mean. He was sitting in the kitchen making toast when the owls came. Not one owl. 7. 7 owls arriving simultaneously through every window the Dursleys had left cracked in the July heat, swooping into the kitchen in a chorus of wings and indignant talons, each one carrying a letter, each letter thick with the Hogwarts seal. Aunt Petunia screamed. Dudley fell off his chair. Uncle Vernon knocked over his coffee, caught sight of the owls, and went a color Harry thought was probably medically concerning. Harry, meanwhile, caught the first owl's letter out of midair as the bird swept past his shoulder, and set it on the table, and caught the second, and stacked it on the first, and continued doing this with the calm efficiency of someone clearing dishes until all 7 were in a neat pile in front of him and the owls had settled on various curtain rods and cabinet tops with the pleased expression of a job completed. He sat down. He opened the top letter. It was the standard Hogwarts acceptance letter, parchment, emerald ink, signed by Minerva McGonagall, head of Gryffindor House and deputy headmistress. He read it completely, set it aside, opened the second. This one had a different seal, Ravenclaw's eagle, and the envelope was blue rather than cream. The letter inside was also a Hogwarts acceptance but worded slightly differently, with an additional paragraph noting the hereditary academic legacy of House Ravenclaw's founder and an invitation to meet with the current head of Ravenclaw House upon arrival. Third, Slytherin's serpent. Green envelope. Similar structure. Fourth, Hufflepuff's badger. Yellow envelope. A note about the Hufflepuff ancestral scholarship. Harry worked through all 7. 5 were house-specific Hogwarts letters. The 6th was from the Ministry of Magic, very formal, very careful in its language, addressed to Lord Emperor Harry James Potter, heir presumptive, Houses Peverell, Slytherin, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Merlin, Morgana, Black Cadet, Gaunt, Emrys, Pendragon, Flammel, Morrigan, Selwyn, and Arkharron, which acknowledged his hereditary titles and made several pointed inquiries about scheduling a meeting with the minister at his earliest convenience. The 7th letter had no ministry seal. It had no Hogwarts seal. It had the same knotwork snake-crown seal Harry had seen on the very first letter, 5 years ago. He opened it carefully. The accounts of all 15 houses have been consolidated under your access authority. Current combined liquid holdings, 437 million galleons. Land holdings summary attached. Political instruments and sworn house alliances summary attached. Lordship rings for all 15 houses are available for collection at your convenience. Sharpfang, Director of Foundational Affairs, Gringotts' Uncle Vernon had recovered enough to go red instead of colorless, which was his natural progression toward explosion. Boy, he started. One moment, Harry said pleasantly, and stacked the 7th letter on top of the others, squared the edges, and looked up. I'm going to need to go to Diagon Alley. You are not going to, I'll be back before dinner, Harry said, standing and tucking the letters into his shirt. I'll make sure the casserole is ready to go in before I leave. The timer's straightforward. Harry James Potter, you will not. Harry paused at the kitchen doorway and looked back at his uncle. There was nothing threatening in his expression, nothing sharp. He just looked at him, the way you look at a door you've already decided you're going to open. Uncle Vernon stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. He just did. Harry went upstairs to change into the least terrible of his clothes, which were still not great, and then he left the house, and Uncle Vernon sat down in the kitchen and was quietly unsettled for the rest of the morning in a way he could never quite explain afterward. Diagon Alley in the peak of August was a different creature entirely from Diagon Alley in the middle of July 5 years ago. It was loud and bright and dense with the specific energy of 11-year-olds and their frantic parents trying to locate everything on the school supply list. Harry moved through it with a purpose that made the crowd part slightly without quite knowing why. He went to Gringotts first. Sharpfang was exactly as Harry had expected from the letters, efficient, direct, and armed with a healthy goblin respect for anyone who'd managed to impress Ragnarok the Ancient. He was younger than Ragnarok had been, which still made him several centuries old, with sharp features and the particular quality of alertness that Harry had noticed all goblins shared but Sharpfang wore more openly, like a professional tool he saw no reason to put away. "All 15 rings," Harry said, when they were seated in Sharpfang's office. "Are they separate? Because wearing 15 rings seems impractical." Sharpfang almost smiled. "They have been consolidated," he said, and produced a box of dark wood that he set on the desk between them. Inside was a single ring. At first glance it looked like silver, a plain band, slightly wider than typical, with an unadorned surface. At second glance, the surface wasn't plain at all. It was covered in the same knotwork as the seal, but denser, more complete, and when Harry picked it up the gold tracery at his knuckles flared briefly and the ring's surface shifted, the knotwork separating into 15 distinct patterns that cycled through at a speed just fast enough to catch. He put it on his right ring finger. It sized itself immediately, and the warmth of the oath recognition moved through his hand up his arm and settled. "Combined Holdings Report," Sharpfang said, sliding a document across the desk. "You'll see that 17 properties in Britain currently need legal review, as several were contested after the houses went dormant. We've prepared the relevant documentation. The ministry has been attempting to claim administrative authority over several of the larger estates for the past 40 years. Now that there is an active heir, those claims are legally void under fundament treaty provisions." "I'll review everything," Harry said, rolling the document and tucking it away. "What do I need for today specifically?" "School starts September 1st. A separate Hogwarts account has been opened, standard student allowance, managed independently of the main holdings. Your school supply expenses will not make a meaningful impression on the broader accounts." A pause. "Your school supply expenses could not make a meaningful impression on the broader accounts if you tried quite hard." Harry glanced up. 437 million galleons, Sharpfang said, with the tone of a man stating a geological fact. "Right," Harry said. He picked up his school vault key. "Let's get started then." Madame Malkin's was the fourth stop after Gringotts, Flourish and Blots, and the apothecary. Harry had spent slightly longer in the bookshop than he'd intended, which was a familiar problem. He'd gone in for the standard school list and come out with 12 additional texts on magical theory, runic systems, blood magic history, and a comprehensive history of foundational magical houses that made him raise his eyebrows at the inaccuracies on the third page before he'd even reached the street. Madame Malkin had 2 other students being fitted when Harry came in. A boy Harry's height with a round, slightly anxious face and the look of someone who had been worrying about something specific for long enough that the worry had become load-bearing. And at the other end of the fitting platform, a girl with a quantity of bushy brown hair and the brightest, most voraciously attentive eyes Harry had ever seen in a human face. She had a copy of Hogwarts, a history open on her knees and was reading it while being fitted, which Harry found immediately interesting. He stepped up onto the third fitting stool and Madame Malkin began running her tape without ceremony. The girl looked up from her book and looked at him with the particular expression of someone categorizing new information in real time. "You're getting the standard robes?" she asked. Not rudely, with genuine curiosity and a slight note of someone who had already thought through the question and had opinions. "Standard plus formal sets," Harry said. "I'll need dress robes." I've read that formal wear standards for the traditional houses are different from standard Hogwarts dress code, she said immediately. There are specific color and insignia protocols going back to the Founders' era. Though most people don't bother with them anymore because the relevant houses have been dormant. She paused. Do you know much about the foundational houses? I've been reading about them. The history is absolutely fascinating. Most of the general texts are quite vague about what actually happened to the lines, Hermione, Madame Malkin said patiently, pinning a seam. Sorry, Hermione said, not sounding particularly sorry. She looked at Harry. Hermione Granger. Harry Potter. The round-faced boy on her other side made a small noise. Hermione's eyes dropped immediately to Harry's forehead with the unconscious reflex of someone who'd read the relevant chapter, then came back up to his face with slightly more effort than the first look had required, which Harry appreciated. You've heard of me, Harry said, not making it a problem. Everyone's heard of you, Hermione said carefully. You're supposed to be, the books say. The books are probably wrong about most of it, Harry said. Which ones have you read? All of them, she said immediately. Every magical history text that mentions you, which is quite a few. Though they're all written from second-hand accounts and mostly focus on the same night, which is significantly less information than I'd like. She was looking at him with a directness that Harry recognized as entirely without malice. This was just what genuine curiosity looked like when it was pointed at you. What actually happened? When Voldemort, the round-faced boy flinched at the name. Tried to kill you? I was 15 months old, Harry said. I don't know. I've been more interested in what's happening now than what happened then. Hermione considered this. That's remarkably pragmatic for someone who's had an entire mythology built around them. The mythology wasn't my idea. No, she agreed. I suppose it wasn't. She turned back to her book for a moment, then back up. What house do you think you'll be in? I've been working through the likely sorting criteria and I think, given the historical profile and what I can infer about your academic interests from the fact that you just came out of Flourish and Blots with twice the required reading material, I think you could be Ravenclaw. Though the traditional assumptions would put you in Gryffindor. I suspect the hat will have opinions, Harry said. The round-faced boy, who had been listening with increasing visible interest, said quietly, Do you think, has anyone ever refused the sorting hat? He seemed to realize he'd spoken aloud and looked slightly alarmed at himself. Sorry. I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom. Harry turned to look at him. Neville had the quality of someone who'd been told, in many small ways over a long time, that his questions were not worth asking. He was asking anyway, which Harry thought spoke well of him. Why would someone want to refuse it? Harry asked, genuinely curious. I've been worried, Neville said, and the honesty in it was so straightforward it was almost uncomfortable. My family expects Gryffindor. My dad was Gryffindor, my mum was Gryffindor, my gran will. There'll be a lot of disappointment if I'm not. He paused. I'm not sure I'm particularly brave. Gryffindor's founder was a battle mage whose primary innovation was pre-commitment, Harry said. Bravery isn't the absence of doubt. It's the decision to move before the doubt finishes making its case. He caught Neville's expression. I'm not saying this to be reassuring. It's just accurate. Neville blinked. Then something in his face settled, slightly, like a stone finding the bottom of a lake. Hermione was looking at Harry again. How do you know about Gryffindor's magical theory? Reading. It's not in any of the standard texts. No, Harry agreed. It's in the primary sources. There was a brief, evaluative silence. I think, Hermione said, that this year is going to be more interesting than I expected. She said it with the satisfaction of someone who had expected interesting things and was pleased to find their expectations confirmed. The remainder of August passed in a productive blur. Harry visited Gringotts twice more, reviewed 47 pages of legal documents regarding the reclamation of house estates, wrote a polite but entirely unambiguous letter to the ministry declining their meeting request on the grounds that he was 11 and his legal affairs were managed by Gringotts under fundament treaty provisions, and the minister was welcome to submit written inquiries through the appropriate channels. Sharpfang had helped draft the goblin law sections, though the tone was entirely Harry's, and spent the rest of his time reading. He was 3/4 of the way through the runic theory text when he found the chapter on the Hogwarts sorting hat. The hat was older than most people realized. Not just a charmed object, a repository, a genuine piece of magic built by 4 founders who had each contributed a portion of their own consciousness to it as a decision-making framework. Which meant, Harry realized, turning the page slowly, that the hat would recognize the resonance of all 4 founders' lines simultaneously the moment it was placed on his head. He sat with that thought for a while. September 1st arrived with the specific chaos of King's Cross Station and approximately 300 children and their families attempting to simultaneously access Platform 9 3/4. Harry had arrived early, habit, and was already through the barrier and on the platform with his trunk loaded and his owl, a beautiful snowy white he'd purchased and named Archimedes purely on the principle that the owl looked like he had opinions about mathematics, settled in her carrier, when the Weasley family arrived like a weather event. There were a great many of them. Red hair across the board, varying heights, 2 parents, and what appeared to be 5 or 6 children in various stages of readiness. Harry noted them with the peripheral attention he gave most things: loud, warm. A mother who operated at the productive center of controlled chaos. 2 older students already in robes. Twins who had the particular energy of people who have decided the world is a straight line and they are personally going to make it zigzag. He also noted the youngest boy, his own age, clearly nervous, clearly excited, clearly the kind of person who felt everything immediately and visibly, which Harry found he didn't mind. Visible feelings were easier to navigate than hidden ones. He spotted Hermione on the platform 3 minutes before the train departed, already in her robes with her book open, and lifted a hand. She navigated through the crowd to him with the focused momentum of someone who had already decided that random social currents were for people without destinations. "You're here early," she said. "You're here late," Harry said, which made her look at her watch with alarm before catching his expression. "You're funny," she said, as if updating a file. "I hadn't expected that." They found a compartment. Neville found them 10 minutes later, slightly out of breath and holding a small toad with the expression of someone managing 3 problems at once. They pulled him in and slid the door closed, and the train began to move, and England started to go past in the green blur of late summer. It was Neville who noticed, about an hour in, when Harry was reading and the afternoon light caught the ring on his right hand at a particular angle. The knotwork on its surface was cycling through its 15 patterns, slow enough now to watch if you were paying attention. Is that, Neville leaned forward slightly, then seemed to think better of it. "Sorry. Is that a lordship ring?" 15 of them, Harry said without looking up. The compartment went quiet. Hermione set down her book. She had the expression of someone recalibrating everything they thought they knew about a situation. 15, she said, slowly. 15 foundational houses went dormant over the past 9 centuries, Harry said, turning a page. I inherited them through a fundament blood oath conducted at Gringotts. The relevant titles include, among others, Peveril, Slytherin, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Merlin. Silence. "You're the heir of Gryffindor," Neville said, very carefully. "And Slytherin," Harry said. He looked up this time, because the look on Neville's face was worth seeing. "And Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Merlin, and 9 others. The complete list is in the public Gringotts registry if you want to read it." He paused. "Hermione will absolutely read it." "I'm reading it tonight," Hermione said immediately. "Then, does Dumbledore know?" The ministry was notified by Gringotts when the oath was completed, which means Dumbledore was almost certainly told shortly after. "I was 6 at the time." Harry looked back at his book. He's been very quiet about it. That's interesting, Hermione said, and the word carried the specific weight she put on things that were actually very interesting and slightly alarming. He didn't contact you? Letters, Harry said. Several over the years. I didn't respond. Neville looked like he was doing arithmetic in his head. You just didn't respond to Dumbledore. He wanted to schedule meetings, Harry said. Discuss my situation. Make sure I was being prepared appropriately. That kind of language. He turned another page. I was being prepared appropriately. By myself. I didn't need his schedule. Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. He's the most powerful wizard alive and the headmaster of the school you're about to attend, she pointed out. He's the headmaster of a school, Harry agreed calmly. Which means he has authority over my education in certain contexts. That's appropriate. It doesn't extend to anything else. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her book again with the air of someone who has decided that arguing this point would require significantly more information and she's going to acquire that information before forming a final opinion. Neville looked between them and then carefully fed his toad, who was named Trevor, a fly he'd been keeping in his pocket, apparently as emergency toad currency. The first sign that Harry's arrival at Hogwarts was going to be categorically different from any other student's arrival that year came at the doors. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall, the whole first-year cohort, damp from the boats and wide-eyed from the castle, and gave her standard address about the sorting, delivered with the crisp precision of someone who had done this many times and had no intention of being less precise just because it was familiar. Harry stood at the back of the group and listened and watched her. He'd read about McGonagall. She was, by any reasonable assessment, an exceptional witch, a registered animagus, a powerful spellcaster, a genuinely good teacher by all available accounts. She was also, by available accounts, one of Dumbledore's most trusted people. Harry had no issue with any of this. He was simply calibrating. McGonagall's eyes swept the first-year group with the practiced efficiency of someone cataloging 30 children in under 10 seconds, and when they reached Harry they paused for a fraction longer than everywhere else. Not long enough to be obvious. Long enough for Harry to notice, and for her to know he'd noticed. She moved on. The sorting itself was held in the Great Hall, which was genuinely beautiful, the ceiling charmed to reflect the sky outside, a slightly overcast September night with stars appearing through the cloud breaks, the 4 long tables and the hundreds of students and the floating candles all creating the specific atmosphere of something that had been ancient for so long it had become comfortable with it. Harry looked up at the ceiling for exactly as long as it took to appreciate the charm work, which was genuinely impressive, and then looked at the front of the hall where the battered hat sat on its stool. The hall had the ambient noise of several hundred students. Then McGonagall unrolled the scroll of names, and the ambient noise dropped, and when she read the first name the sorting began. Harry watched each student sit and be sorted. He catalogued which students went where and why, not performing analysis, just doing it automatically, the way the Gryffindor battle sense was always doing it about everything. He noted Hannah Abbott going to Hufflepuff with the expression of someone who'd been hoping for exactly that result. He noted Draco Malfoy, who had attempted to introduce himself to Harry on the train with the practiced air of someone extending what they considered a generous offer, being sorted into Slytherin in under 2 seconds, the hat barely touching his head. He noted the Weasley boy, Ron, Harry had learned on the platform, going to Gryffindor with visible relief. He noted Hermione going to Gryffindor with an expression of focused satisfaction, which told him she'd decided Gryffindor was the optimal outcome and was pleased the hat agreed. He noted Neville going to Gryffindor and closing his eyes briefly after the hat said it, which told him the relief was so strong he'd needed a moment. Potter, Harry. The hall was always loud during the sorting. It wasn't loud now. Whatever ambient noise had persisted through the other sortings dropped out at his name, and Harry walked up the aisle to the stool in a silence that had a particular quality, the quality of held breath. He sat on the stool. He could see the hall from here, 4 tables, hundreds of faces, and at the far end, the staff table, where a man with half-moon spectacles and a long silver beard was watching with an expression of perfectly composed attentiveness that Harry had been waiting to see in person. Dumbledore was older in reality than in the photographs. And more careful. That was the word for it, not cautious, but careful, in the way a craftsman is careful, like every action was considered before execution. His eyes were very blue and they were moving over Harry with an intelligence that Harry recognized and respected and intended to remain completely his own business about. The hat dropped over his eyes. For a moment there was just the feeling of old, concentrated magic pressing against his mind, and then something like a voice, not in his ears but in his thoughts, and it was quite old and quite surprised and quite present, all at once. "Well," said the hat. "Now. That's not something I've ever encountered before." "Hello," Harry thought back. "4 of them," the hat said, clearly working through something. "I'm touching 4 of my makers simultaneously. The resonance is, do you understand what you're carrying?" "I'm learning," Harry replied. "You're more than learning. You were 9 months old and Slytherin's air resonance was already activating." A pause. "You were 6 and you walked into Gringotts alone. You're 11 and you declined to respond to Albus Dumbledore." Another pause. "I respect the consistency." "Which house?" Harry thought. "That's rather the question, isn't it?" The hat seemed to find this genuinely challenging in a way that it was enjoying. "You'd thrive in all 4. Genuinely, not as a compliment. The founders built their houses as complementary philosophies and you carry all 4 as active inheritance, which means technically you're pre-sorted into every house simultaneously, which is not a sentence I have ever been in a position to construct before." It paused thoughtfully. "I could declare all 4. It's within my authority." It would create rather a stir. Yes, Harry thought, it would. "Is that a problem for you?" Harry thought about it. About the letter that said cupboard. About Ragnarok sitting in his chair finished and certain. About Sharpfang's document with the land holdings and the ministry claiming authority over things that now belonged to Harry, had always belonged to Harry, and had simply been waiting for him to show up. About Dumbledore's careful blue eyes. No, Harry thought. It's not a problem for me. "Very well," said the hat, and there was something in it that sounded satisfied, the way an instrument sounds when it's finally played at the right pitch. It raised its brim. "Potter, Harry, sorted into all 4 houses," it announced, in a voice considerably louder than it had used for any other student, in a tone that suggested it had saved this particular announcement for an occasion worthy of it, as heir to the foundational 4, by ancient right of blood and inheritance. The silence lasted approximately 2 full seconds. Then the hall exploded. All 4 tables erupted simultaneously, which was unprecedented and produced a sound like the ceiling coming off. The 4 house ghosts appeared in the same moment, the fat friar, the grey lady, the bloody baron, and nearly headless Nick, with the expressions of people who had felt something shift in the foundational architecture of the building. At the staff table, McGonagall had gone very still with the expression of someone updating a very great deal of information very quickly. Dumbledore had both hands flat on the table and was watching Harry with those blue eyes that were now considerably less composed than they'd been, not distressed, but recalibrating. Like a chess master who has just watched a piece move in a direction chess pieces don't move. Harry stepped off the stool. He set the hat back on it with both hands, carefully. He looked out at the great hall, all 4 tables, all 4 heads of house, the 100-year-old portraits and the floating candles and the enchanted sky. "Which table do I sit at?" he asked McGonagall, raising his voice enough to be heard over the noise. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. "I imagine," she said, with what might have been, just barely, around the edges, the beginning of a smile she was professionally obligated to suppress, "that you could sit at any of them." Harry looked across the hall. Hermione and Neville were at the Gryffindor table watching him with very different expressions. Hermione's was the face of someone who had anticipated something exceptional and was still managing to be surprised by the exact form it took, and Neville's was the face of someone experiencing pure delight and not trying very hard to conceal it. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table and sat between them. "All 4 houses," Hermione said, immediately and quietly. The hat can do that?" "It did," Harry said. "How is that even, Hermione?" She paused. "Yes? It's been a very long day," Harry said. "Can we revisit this after I've eaten?" She closed her mouth. Then opened it again. "Yes," she said, very carefully. "We can revisit this after you've eaten." Neville was grinning. He'd been grinning since the hat spoke, and he hadn't stopped, and it was the genuine unself-conscious grin of someone who had found the exact right thing in the exact right moment. "I knew it," he said, to no one in particular. "I absolutely knew it." At the staff table, Dumbledore lifted his goblet and took a slow drink and sat with the expression of a man who had planned for many things and was now sitting with the plan he had not planned for, and deciding what to do about it. He was not afraid. Harry didn't want him to be afraid. He was, however, very thoughtful. Harry thought that was probably a reasonable response. He helped himself to the roast chicken and began to eat. Chapter 3, The Weight of Crowns. The morning after the sorting, Harry woke up at 5 and lay in the Gryffindor dormitory listening to 4 other boys breathe and thought about the staff meeting that had definitely happened last night after the feast. He couldn't have told you exactly what was discussed. But he knew enough about institutional responses to unusual situations to make reasonable inferences. Someone, probably McGonagall, who was precise and efficient, would have raised the question of which common room Harry was entitled to access. Someone else, probably Flitwick, who Harry suspected would be interested in the hereditary Ravenclaw angle, would have pointed out that the ancient house charters all predated the modern dormitory system. Dumbledore would have listened to all of it and then suggested something measured and reasonable that didn't actually address the core issue, which was that the categories they were trying to sort Harry into didn't fit him. Harry got up, dressed, and went down to the common room before anyone else was awake. He sat in the chair closest to the fire, a good chair, the kind that had been sat in enough to develop an opinion about how sitting should work, and opened the runic theory text and read for an hour in the firelight while Hogwarts breathed around him. The castle was genuinely alive in a way that wasn't metaphor. He could feel it, the Ravenclaw ward knowledge made it readable, the structure of the enchantments layered over centuries, each headmaster adding their work on top of the last, the oldest magic sitting deepest and warmest at the foundations. The founders' contributions were unmistakable. He recognized them the way you recognize a voice you've heard before in a new context. At 6:30, the portrait hole swung open and Hermione came down the stairs already dressed with her bag already packed, stopped dead when she saw him, and then walked directly to the chair across from him and sat down. "How long have you been up?" she asked. "Hour and a bit," Harry said. She pulled out her own book, not a school text, a history of goblin-wizard relations that Harry had seen at Flourish and Blots, and opened it without further comment. They read in companionable silence for 20 minutes while the fire crackled and the castle woke up around them. This was, Harry would reflect later, the moment Hermione Granger became his best friend. Not the sorting, not the train, not any single dramatic exchange. This, the two of them reading in comfortable parallel at 6 in the morning, neither needing the other to perform anything. Ron Weasley came down at 7 with the expression of someone who was not yet fully committed to consciousness, stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw them, and said, "Oh, you're both already, right, okay," and went to the breakfast table with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had grown up with a Hermione-shaped reality already being a thing that existed. Harry had not quite decided what to make of Ron Weasley yet. Ron had an openness to him that Harry found unfamiliar, in a way that required careful handling. The Weasley family warmth was clearly genuine, not performed, and genuine warmth was something Harry had enough experience of the absence of that he recognized the real thing when it appeared, and recognized also his own slight wariness of it. He filed this under things to think about later and followed Ron to breakfast. The first week of classes established several things quickly. Harry was the best student in every class he attended, which was less remarkable than it sounded given that he'd spent 5 years reading primary sources while other students had been doing primary school. What was more interesting was the gap between subjects. Charms came naturally and immediately, transfiguration took slightly more effort and rewarded it, potions required a precision that he found genuinely satisfying, and defense against the dark arts was, currently, taught by a man named Quirinus Quirrell who smelled of garlic and fear and had a nervous tick in his left eye that activated specifically when certain topics came up and not others, which Harry logged as significant on day 1. Professor Snape was a separate category entirely. Harry had read about Snape. Cross-referenced him, actually, in the records of Slytherin House, in the Ministry personnel files that Sharpfong had provided as part of the Slytherin Lordship documentation, in 3 separate published histories of the First Wizarding War where Snape appeared as a footnote that didn't quite add up to a complete picture. He was brilliant and he was bitter and he was, underneath both of those things, deeply loyal to something Harry hadn't yet fully identified. He was also, from the first potions lesson, clearly intending to make Harry's life difficult. "Potter," Snape said, on the first day, in that voice designed to carry without effort. "Our new celebrity." He paused. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" The class went very quiet. Harry had been half watching Snape and half reviewing the lesson notes he'd prepared the night before. He looked up fully. "Draught of living death," he said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known, which you'd know given your own research into soporific compounds in 1979, you published a modification to the standard recipe under a pseudonym in Potions Quarterly. The asphodel and wormwood combination was your innovation, actually. The standard pre-1979 recipe used valerian root." The silence took on a different quality. Snape's expression was unreadable, which was itself information. His eyes moved over Harry's face with the specific attention of someone recalibrating. "Where," he said carefully, "did you read that?" "Potions Quarterly, Volume 12, Harry said. "The pseudonym was Septimus Prince. Prince is your mother's maiden name." He held Snape's gaze with zero aggression and zero apology. The modification was genuinely clever. The valerian substitution reduced preparation time by 1/3. Snape looked at him for a long moment. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said, quietly and clearly against his will. "And I will be testing you on it." He moved on to the lesson with no further attempts at public humiliation, which Harry noted and appreciated in the way he appreciated all accurate assessments of situations. Hermione, 2 seats over, was looking at Harry with an expression that was half impressed and half slightly horrified. She mouthed "How did you know that?" and Harry mouthed reading back, and she closed her eyes briefly in the manner of someone accepting that this was just going to be a recurring dynamic. Neville, on Harry's other side, had relaxed visibly the moment Snape redirected. His potions performance was, not strong, and clearly not for lack of effort. The anxiety made his hands shake slightly, which was death in a subject where ingredient measurements were precise to a fraction of a gram. Harry, over the next 2 weeks, quietly moved their worktables together and began working in a way that positioned him between Neville and Snape's line of sight when Snape was circling. He didn't announce this. He just did it. Neville noticed on the 3rd day and didn't say anything either. He just started producing better work, and the slight easing in his shoulders was sufficient acknowledgement. Draco Malfoy attempted the confrontation Harry had been expecting since the train on a Wednesday in the 2nd week. It happened in the corridor outside Charms, which was a reasonable location, busy enough to have an audience but transitional enough to have plausible deniability. Malfoy had positioned himself with Crabbe and Goyle at the optimal choke point, which was slightly impressive from a spatial awareness perspective, though Harry noted he'd chosen a position that backed himself toward a dead end, which undermined the tactical value considerably. "Potter," Malfoy said, with the practiced ease of someone who'd rehearsed this. "I offered you my hand on the train. I notice you didn't take it." "I remember," Harry said pleasantly. "My father says alliances matter more than most people realize," Malfoy said. "Especially for someone in your position." With what you're apparently inheriting. His eyes went to the ring briefly. The right friends could make a significant difference. Harry looked at him. Not unkindly, with a directness that was simply too honest to be unkind. Draco, he said, what you're describing isn't friendship. You're describing a transaction where you get reflected status for my titles and I get, what, exactly? Your father's connections? He tilted his head slightly. I inherited the Selwyn lordship 3 months ago. The Selwyns and the Malfoys have had an alliance treaty since 1834. Which means your family's connections are already, technically, sworn to my house. He paused. I mention this not to be unpleasant but because you should know the landscape you're operating in before you make offers based on an outdated map. Malfoy stared at him. Crabbe and Goyle looked at each other with the expressions of people whose job description had not included this. I'm not your enemy, Harry added, which was true. I'm also not the person you thought I was when you planned this conversation. He stepped past them and walked to Charms. Hermione was already there. She'd heard everything, they both had, and she waited until they were seated before she leaned over and said quietly, the Selwyn-Malfoy treaty thing. Was that true? Checked it last month, Harry confirmed. It's in the Alliance registry. Hermione processed this. He went pale, she said. I know, Harry said. I'm hoping it gives him something useful to think about. She looked at him sideways. You're not what people expected. I know that too, Harry said. Is it strange? That people have an expectation of you before they've met you? He considered it genuinely, because Hermione asked things genuinely and deserved genuine answers. It was stranger before I understood what I was, he said. Now it's mostly just navigation. People's expectations are information about them. You work with the information. That's a remarkably unsentimental way to approach being famous, she said. The alternative is being bothered by it, Harry said. I tried that for about 3 days when I was 7. It wasn't useful. She smiled, quick and real. Fair enough. The letter from Dumbledore arrived on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week. It came by a very grand-looking owl that waited with pointed patience while Harry read it at the Gryffindor breakfast table. The letter was written in a precise, unhurried hand and was, Harry had to acknowledge, genuinely well constructed. It didn't demand. It didn't claim authority it didn't have. It acknowledged Harry's independence of action, specifically his management of the foundational house affairs through Gringotts, with what seemed like genuine respect. It asked for a meeting at Harry's convenience, framed not as a headmaster's request to a student but as one, here Dumbledore paused in the prose in a way that felt deliberate, invested party to another. At the bottom, in slightly smaller writing, I knew your parents, Harry. I would like, if you are willing, to tell you about them. Not as information. As memory. Harry read that line twice. Then he folded the letter, fed the owl a strip of bacon, and took out his own parchment. Professor Dumbledore, he wrote. Sunday afternoon, if convenient. Harry Potter. He sent it back. Hermione, watching, said nothing. Which, from Hermione, was the loudest possible form of commentary. I know, Harry said. I didn't say anything. You were thinking loudly. I'm always thinking loudly, she said. You'll need to be more specific. You think I should be more cautious about meeting with him, Harry said. She stirred her porridge for a moment. I think, she said carefully, that he's been watching you since September 1st with the expression of someone playing a game they didn't expect to be playing. And I think you already know that. And I think you're meeting with him anyway, which means you're not unaware of the risk, you just don't think it's a risk you can't handle. She looked up. So I'm not going to tell you to be careful. You're always careful. I'm just going to note that he's been doing this for a very long time and he's very good at it. I know, Harry said. Okay, she said. Pass the jam. Sunday afternoon, Dumbledore's office. The headmaster's office was exactly the kind of space that told you things about the person inhabiting it if you knew how to look. The portraits of past headmasters were real, genuinely conscious impressions, not photographs, each one a functional intelligence that was watching Harry with varying degrees of subtlety. The instruments on the spindle-legged tables were mostly measurement devices of various kinds, some goblin-made, some bespoke, and at least 2 of them were currently active, their needles moving in slow arcs. One of them, Harry noted, swung with increased activity the moment he crossed the threshold. It was measuring his magical output, or the resonance of the ring, or both. The phoenix on the perch near the window was watching him with eyes the color of banked fire, tilting its head in the slow, continuous way of very old intelligences taking in something new. Dumbledore was behind his desk when Harry entered, but he stood as Harry came in, a courtesy that was deliberate and genuine, and gestured to the chair across from him. He was in deep blue robes today, less grandfatherly than his public image, more precise. The half-moon spectacles were perched halfway down his nose and his eyes above them were clear and careful and, Harry was interested to see, genuinely warm. "Thank you for coming," Dumbledore said. "Thank you for the letter," Harry said. "It was well written. Sit across from most 11-year-olds the way you sat across from me and you'd win every time." Dumbledore tilted his head very slightly. "But not across from you." "I didn't say that," Harry said. "I said the letter was well written." He sat, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at the headmaster with his full attention. "Tell me about my parents." Something moved through Dumbledore's expression, something real, underneath the careful composure. "Your father," he said, after a moment, "was the most thoroughly alive person I think I have ever known. He took up space in a room in a way that was entirely unconscious and entirely impossible to ignore. James Potter at 17 had the absolute certainty of someone who has never seriously considered the possibility that the world would not cooperate with him." A pause. "He was also, to be honest, sometimes insufferably arrogant. But it was the arrogance of someone who was often right, which made it both more irritating and more forgivable." Harry listened. He said nothing. He let the words come. "Your mother," Dumbledore said, and his voice changed registers slightly, not sadder, but more careful, "was the most formidable intelligence I have ever had the pleasure of teaching. Including myself at her age, and I am not given to false modesty on academic matters. Lily Evans was not from a magical family. She arrived at Hogwarts knowing nothing and within 3 years she knew more about the theoretical underpinnings of magic than most of my faculty." He paused. "She also had a way of looking at you that made deception feel genuinely pointless. Not uncomfortable. Just insufficient. Like you were trying to give her glass and she already owned diamonds." Harry thought, for the first time in his memory, about his mother as a person. Not as an absence, not as a symbol, not as the name on the other side of the story about the lightning scar. As a person. Who had read. Who had seen through things. Who had started from nothing and understood everything. He felt something settle in him, quietly, that had been slightly unsettled for a long time. "She sounds," Harry said, "like someone I would have liked." "She was someone everyone liked," Dumbledore said, "who chose very carefully who she trusted." His eyes were steady on Harry's. "She would have been," he stopped himself. "She would have had a great deal to say about this year already." "She'd have been terrifying at 11, Harry agreed, which made Dumbledore's composure slip briefly into something that was definitely a smile. They sat with that for a moment. "I want to ask you something," Harry said. "And I'd like you to answer it honestly, which I think you're capable of more often than most people believe." Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. "Ask." "The prophecy," Harry said. A very brief stillness. "What do you know about a prophecy?" "Enough," Harry said. "There's a record in the Department of Mysteries, orb number 97, I believe, filed under my name and Voldemort's. I know it exists because the Peveril House records include a reference to a seer's declaration made in 1980, which aligns with the timeline and the parties. I haven't heard its contents. I'm asking if you intend to share them with me, and if so, when. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. You are, he said, finally, remarkably thorough. I find it reduces surprises, Harry said. The prophecy, Dumbledore said, concerns the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. It was made before your birth and it touched on both you and another, Neville Longbottom, as it happens. Voldemort's choice of target was what activated it. By attacking you, Dumbledore stopped, seemed to make a decision about how far to go, and went further than Harry had expected. He marked you as his equal. And the prophecy's terms suggest that neither can live while the other survives. Harry processed this. I appreciate you telling me directly, he said. I had considered waiting, Dumbledore said, with a frankness that surprised Harry and was clearly meant to. Until you were older. Until I knew you better. I had constructed several arguments for why waiting was the responsible choice. He paused. You took 2 minutes in this office to demonstrate that waiting was not necessary. No, Harry agreed. It wasn't. What are you thinking? Dumbledore asked, and the question had genuine curiosity in it, no chess game edge. Harry thought about Neville's face on the train saying I'm not sure I'm particularly brave. About the prophecy saying Neville could have been the target. About the specific arbitrary cruelty of a villain choosing which child to ruin. I'm thinking, Harry said, that I want to deal with this on my terms, not his. Not reactively. Not when he forces the issue. He looked at Dumbledore. I'm also thinking that I'm 11, which is a constraint, and that I need the next several years to prepare properly, which means Hogwarts is genuinely valuable to me and not just a bureaucratic requirement. He paused. I'm also thinking that you've been trying to protect me for 10 years by keeping me uninformed, and I understand the instinct even if the execution was flawed. Dumbledore was very quiet. I'm not angry about it, Harry added. No, Dumbledore said slowly. You're not, are you? He seemed to find this both relieving and slightly unsettling in a way he was honest about. You're something I have never encountered before, Harry. I want to be useful to you. I'm aware that my definition of useful and your definition of useful may require negotiation. Yes, Harry said. They might. He stood. Same time next week, if you like. I'd like to hear more about my mother. Dumbledore stood as well. I would like that very much, he said. Harry was at the door when Dumbledore said, the object in the third-floor corridor. Harry turned. It is guarded, Dumbledore said carefully. Elaborately. I mention this not as a warning, you strike me as someone who doesn't require warnings, but as information. The guarding was necessary. The object itself is, he paused. It would be better for everyone if it remained where it is. Harry looked at him. Someone's after it, he said. I have suspicions, Dumbledore said. Which I am monitoring. Quirrell, Harry said. The composure stayed intact this time, but only just. What makes you say that? He's afraid of something specific, Harry said. The fear has a shape. It's not general anxiety, it's operational. And the garlic is theatrical, not functional. Real vampire deterrence uses different plants. He held Dumbledore's gaze. What's on the third floor? A pause. The Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore said. Nicholas Flamel's. Harry processed the fact that he was technically the heir of Nicholas Flamel's house as well, filed it under interesting complications, and said, I'll leave it alone unless I have to. And if you have to? Then I'll deal with it, Harry said, and left. The Quidditch situation arose in October. Harry had gone to the first flying lesson without particular expectations and had found, within approximately 30 seconds of mounting the broom, that the Gryffindor battle sense extended seamlessly to three-dimensional space, which meant flying was less something he was learning and more something he was remembering he already knew how to do. He flew the way he did everything, without performance, without showing off, just efficiently and with complete authority over the space he was in. Madam Hooch noticed. Oliver Wood noticed. The entire Gryffindor Quidditch team noticed. Harry said yes to Seeker because it was genuinely interesting, not because he cared about Quidditch as a social system, and because the Nimbus 2000 that appeared via McGonagall the next morning was a genuinely excellent piece of enchanted craftwork that he found he had opinions about. He spent an afternoon in the air over the pitch testing its handling before practice, not showing off for anyone watching from the stands, just getting properly acquainted with the mechanics. Neville, watching from the ground, cupped his hands and shouted, "Are you actually upside down on purpose? Testing the stirrup enchantments?" Harry shouted back. "Is that a barrel roll?" Checking the tail drag response. "Harry, that is not a normal thing people do." Harry leveled out and came in at standard altitude and landed next to Neville with the expression of someone who has just confirmed a hypothesis. "The tail drag compensation is excellent," he said. Nimbus significantly improved the design between the 1990 and 2000 models. Neville stared at him. Then started laughing. The real kind, helpless and surprised, the kind that came out of genuine delight. Harry looked at him and felt something warm and uncomplicated settle in his chest. November brought two things: the first Quidditch match against Slytherin, which Harry won in 11 minutes by spotting the snitch during the initial warm-up arc and simply staying close to it until the game's defensive chaos created a clear path, efficient rather than spectacular, which frustrated the commentator, a Weasley twin named Fred or George, who said into the microphone with audible disappointment, "And he just sort of went and got it. That's it. 11 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you didn't leave your drinks untended," and the troll. The troll came on Halloween, as if the calendar had a sense of drama. Harry was in the Great Hall when Professor Quirrell burst in and announced a troll in the dungeons in a voice slightly too theatrical for someone who genuinely just discovered a troll in the dungeons, and in the subsequent chaos he registered two things simultaneously: that Hermione had gone to the bathroom 20 minutes before and hadn't come back, and that the direction of the screaming that erupted 2 minutes later was not the dungeons. He was already moving when he heard it. Neville was half a step behind him. He hadn't been asked. He'd just come, which was, Harry filed this away as important information about Neville Longbottom, that when something was actually happening he moved first and processed the decision afterward. The bathroom had a mountain troll in it, which was significantly larger than the illustrations Harry had seen and smelled considerably worse. Hermione was backed into the far wall behind a row of sinks, not screaming, analyzing. Harry registered, she was actually analyzing the troll's movement pattern with the specific focus of someone trying to find a solution, which was very Hermione and completely impractical in the next 15 seconds. The troll raised its club. Harry pulled his wand and said, "Wingardium Leviosa," not at the club, the way he'd read the story was supposed to go, but at the troll's legs, both of them simultaneously, lifting the creature's entire lower body 3 feet off the ground and rotating it so the club swung into a bathroom stall rather than into Hermione. The troll, inverted and confused, was significantly less threatening. "Petrificus totalis," Harry said next, and the troll went rigid, crashed to the floor with a sound that cracked 3 tiles, and stayed there. Silence. Hermione lowered her hands from her face. She looked at the troll. She looked at Harry. She looked at Neville, who was standing in the doorway with his wand out and an expression of concentrated readiness that sat strangely well on his face given how recently he'd been the boy worried about disappointing his grandmother. "You," Hermione said to Harry, lifted the troll. "Both legs," Harry said. "Simultaneously. It's the same principle as the single levitation charm but with bilateral focus." He paused. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. Her voice was steady. She was shaking slightly, which was the correct physical response to almost being hit by a mountain troll and not any kind of weakness. That was, the bilateral focus thing, that's not a first-year technique. "No," Harry agreed. She looked at him with those bright eyes that catalogued everything. "How far ahead are you?" she asked. "Ahead of what?" "The curriculum," she said. "How far ahead of the curriculum are you?" Harry thought about Ragnarok's office, about the runic texts, about 5 years of reading primary sources in a cupboard by the light that came through the slats at noon in July. "Fairly far," he said. She nodded, once, with the expression of someone making a decision. "Then I need to work harder," she said, and stepped over the unconscious troll toward the door, "and you need to help me." It wasn't a question. "All right," Harry said. McGonagall arrived with Snape and Quirrell 30 seconds later and found 3 first-years standing next to a petrified mountain troll in a ruined bathroom, and her expression went through several stages too quickly to fully track. Snape was looking at Harry with an expression he kept carefully neutral. Quirrell was looking at the troll with something that, under the theatrical shock, was almost, Harry thought, disappointment. He filed that too. December came, and with it a development Harry had not anticipated. The package arrived the morning of Christmas Day, set apart from the small pile of gifts that appeared at the foot of his bed, from Hermione, a comprehensive text on advanced charms theory, from Neville, a small potted Mimbulus Mimbletonia with a note that said it defends itself, which I thought was appropriate, from Sharpfang, a formal document acknowledging Harry's quarterly account review. The December gift from the Weasley matriarch, who had apparently decided, on the basis of some information network Harry hadn't identified, to include Harry in her Christmas confectionery distribution, was a warm package of homemade fudge that smelled extraordinary and hit him with an emotion he didn't have proper words for. The separate package had no card. Inside was a cloak. Silver-gray fabric that shifted as he lifted it, not fabric really, more like woven light, like the surface of water at dusk. He held it up and his hand, below the cloak's edge, disappeared. Invisibility cloak. He turned it over. Along the inner hem, in embroidery so fine it was almost invisible, a tiny knotwork design. The same knotwork as his ring. Peveril. This had belonged to his father. His father had inherited it from the Peveril line, and Harry had inherited the Peveril lordship, which meant, he thought through the chain of ownership quickly. This cloak was not just a rare magical object. It was one of 3 Deathly Hallows. His, by direct hereditary right, but someone had been holding it. Someone who was now choosing to return it, on Christmas morning, without a note. Harry set the cloak across his knees and looked at it for a long time. He thought about Dumbledore and the way he'd said the object would be better where it is with the specific tone of someone who believed in sitting on things rather than addressing them. He thought about his father, alive in this cloak once. Young. Taking up space in rooms. He thought about the Resurrection Stone and the Elder Wand, which were the other 2 Hallows, and where they might be, and what it meant that all 3 seemed to be moving toward convergence. He folded the cloak carefully and put it at the bottom of his trunk. Then he went to the common room where Neville was already feeding Trevor and the fire was bright, and he sat down and ate Molly Weasley's fudge, which was, genuinely, simply, without any complication, one of the best things he'd ever eaten. "Good Christmas?" Neville asked. "Yeah," Harry said, which was true. "Good Christmas." Chapter 4, Blood Calls to Blood. The Chamber of Secrets opened in October of Harry's 2nd year, and Harry knew about it 3 days before anyone else did. He knew because the castle told him. Not in words, Hogwarts didn't use words, it used sensation, the deep structural awareness Harry had been developing since 1st year through the Ravenclaw ward knowledge. The castle was a living magical system, layered and complex, and he'd spent most of 1st year simply learning to read it the way you learn to read weather, looking for patterns, for deviations, for the specific quality of something changing in a system you've come to know well. What he felt in early October of 2nd year was a deep unease, a resonance from somewhere below the inhabited floors, something ancient activating that had been dormant for 50 years and was now awake and moving through the walls. He was in the middle of a transfiguration essay when he felt it. He set his quill down and sat very still for a moment, reading the sensation, triangulating the source. Below the dungeons. Below the foundations. Something old and deeply, specifically Slytherin. He thought about this carefully before doing anything else. The previous year had established certain rhythms. His Sunday meetings with Dumbledore had become, quietly, something Harry valued, not because Dumbledore didn't still have his own angles and agendas, he absolutely did, but because he was honest about having them when pressed and because the stories about Harry's parents were real and given without performance. Harry had learned to read Dumbledore's honesty the way he read everything, by feel and by pattern and by the specific texture of words chosen versus words withheld. The man was complex and careful and genuinely capable of growth, which was more than Harry could say for most people in positions of institutional power. He hadn't told Dumbledore about the chamber yet. He was still deciding what to do with the information himself. Summer had been productive. The Dursleys remained entirely unchanged. Uncle Vernon had developed a specific strategy of treating Harry as a problem that could be managed by a combination of ignoring and occasional bluster, which Harry found perfectly functional. Dudley had, over the past year, developed the specific relationship with Harry that large dogs sometimes develop with cats who've established unmistakably that they cannot be chased, wary, resentful, and fundamentally unengaged. Aunt Petunia's expressions remained what they'd always been. Harry ran in the mornings for the physical discipline of it, visited Gringotts twice for account reviews, and spent a significant portion of August working through the advanced runic systems text that Hermione had found at a specialist shop in Diagon Alley and presented to him with the air of someone bearing a gift they're fairly sure will cause problems. She'd also, he'd noticed, grown 3 inches and developed a new habit of arguing theoretical points with herself quietly before bringing them to him, which meant that when she did bring them to him they were fully formed and worth engaging with. He thought she might be the most interesting person he'd ever met. He didn't say this to her because she would immediately ask him to define his ranking methodology and they'd be there for an hour. The first petrification happened on the 15th of October. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, found rigid and graying in a corridor puddle. The message on the wall in something that looked disturbingly like blood: "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware." Harry stood in the crowd of students who'd gathered before Filch arrived and read the message with his full attention and thought about 3 things simultaneously. First, Parseltongue. If the chamber was Slytherin's creation, and everything in his Slytherin inheritance suggested it was, then the mechanism of its opening was Parseltongue-based, which meant whoever had opened it was either a Parselmouth or had access to something that functioned as one. Second, the word heir. Not Slytherin. Not the founder. Heir. Someone was performing an identity, claiming a lineage. Someone who didn't know that the legitimate heir of Slytherin was already at Hogwarts and had been for a year and was currently reading their graffiti with something between analytical interest and mild irritation. Third, the nature of the attack itself. Petrification. Not a killing curse, not a direct assault. Something more specific, more classical. A method with a signature. Basilisk, he thought. It had to be a basilisk. He went to the library that evening. Hermione was already there. "Basilisk," she said, when he sat down across from her. "I know," he said. She looked up. The eye contact kills. Indirect gaze petrifies. Mrs. Norris saw a reflection, the puddle. She slid a book across the table, already open to the relevant page. The chamber is a physical location. Snake motif throughout. Parselmouth activation. She paused, and there was something behind her eyes that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to caution. "Harry." "I know," he said again, differently this time. "You're a Parselmouth," she said quietly. "And the legitimate heir of Slytherin. And someone is down there performing that identity." She met his eyes. "What are you going to do?" Harry looked at the basilisk illustration on the open page. Massive creature. One of the oldest magical predators known, capable of surviving for centuries in the right conditions, typically loyal to a Parselmouth master. Loyal to its most recent master, specifically, loyalty in basilisks wasn't hereditary, it was tonal. The basilisk in the chamber had been Salazar Slytherin's. 50 years ago, someone had activated it partially, Tom Riddle, he was almost certain, the timeline matched. Now it was active again. I'm going to find the chamber, Harry said. Obviously, Hermione said. I'm coming. No, Harry said. She looked at him. The basilisk's gaze, he said. I can use Parseltongue to command it. You can't. If we're down there and it looks at you and I'm a half-second too slow, he stopped. No. I'm not helpless, she said, and the temperature in the words was precise. I know you're not, Harry said. You're one of the two most capable people in this school. That's not what I said. He met her eyes. I said the specific advantage I have in this specific situation is one I have alone. It would be tactically irresponsible to bring someone into a space where their greatest threat is something I can neutralize and they can't. He paused. Would you bring me into a situation where the primary threat was something only you could handle and my presence was a liability? A long pause. No, she said tightly. Then don't argue with me about this one, he said. She argued with him about it anyway, thoroughly and intelligently, for 20 minutes, and none of her arguments changed the calculus and she knew it, which made her more rather than less thorough about it. Harry let her finish. Then he said, will you research the mechanism? The original chamber architecture, how Slytherin sealed it, how the activation sequence works. I'll need everything you can find on Parselmouth command structures. She pulled the book toward her and opened a fresh sheet of notes. You're infuriating, she said. I know, Harry said. I'm going to find everything, she said. Every single detail. If you go down there and get yourself killed, I'm going to be very angry with you. Noted, Harry said. He told Neville the following morning. They were in the greenhouse, which was their standard meeting point when Harry wanted a conversation without an audience. Professor Sprout was between classes and the greenhouse was occupied only by them and an impressive array of slightly aggressive mandrakes whose containers had been carefully resealed after the week's herbology session. Chamber of Secrets is open, Harry said. Basilisk. I'm going to find it. Neville absorbed this. He'd become, over the course of first year and the summer between, noticeably different, not in character but in resolution. Something had been reinforced in him. He stood differently. He spoke first more often. He had opinions he volunteered rather than swallowed. When Harry said I'm going to find the chamber, Neville's face did a specific thing, not alarm, not refusal, but the focused calculation of someone deciding how they can be useful. Can I help? Neville said. Not with the chamber directly, Harry said. I need you here. Watching Quirrell. Neville straightened slightly. Quirrell. He's been increasingly erratic since September, Harry said. The garlic disappeared 3 weeks ago. He started wearing the turban every day rather than just in class. He's been in the restricted section twice after hours. Pants mentioned it to Dumbledore and I found out through the usual means. He paused. Something's building. I need to go deal with the chamber before whatever Quirrell's planning reaches its conclusion, because I don't want to be underground dealing with a basilisk while something else is happening up here. What exactly is Quirrell planning? Neville asked. Getting to the Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Which is still on the 3rd floor, which Dumbledore still believes is adequately guarded, which I think underestimates Quirrell's capabilities. He looked at Neville. If Quirrell makes a move toward the 3rd floor while I'm in the chamber, I need to know immediately. Neville met his eyes. How do I reach you? Harry produced a small mirror from his jacket. It was one of two, a communication pair, purchased from a Gringotts specialty items catalog and charged to the Peveril account, which had a specific budget allocation for operational equipment that Sharpfong had labeled field assets in the account ledger with the professional neutrality of someone who had decided not to ask questions. Two-way mirror, Harry said, handing it to him. Tap it twice and say my name." Neville took it with the careful gravity of someone accepting a real responsibility. "Okay," he said. "Then, how are you going to find the chamber?" "I'm going to listen," Harry said. Parseltongue. "The castle's been vibrating on a frequency I recognize, snake speech, deep in the walls. I've been triangulating the source for 3 days." He paused. "I think it's in the second-floor girls' bathroom." Neville stared at him. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom? "Something in the plumbing architecture is different to the rest of the castle," Harry said. "And Myrtle died 50 years ago, which aligns with the last time the chamber was opened. I think she died there." Neville looked at the sealed mandrake containers around them, then back at Harry. "Does Hermione know about the mirror?" "She asked for one," Harry said. "I'm having a second pair made. She's going to give you a thorough summary of everything you may have missed while you were underground," Neville said. "I know," Harry said. "She'll be right about most of it." He went that night. Not because the timing was particularly optimal but because the second petrification happened at 4 in the afternoon. A second-year Gryffindor girl named Nicola Harvey who'd gone around a corner and apparently looked at the ceiling reflection in a puddle, and Harry had spent the afternoon watching the castle's population spiral toward the specific kind of institutional panic that made people do ill-considered things, and he'd decided that every day he waited was a day the basilisk moved through the walls looking for the next indirect reflection. He went alone, after midnight, when the castle was quiet. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom was cold and damp and smelled of standing water and whatever specific sadness it was that had accumulated in this room over 50 years of being haunted by a ghost who hadn't quite processed her own death. The sinks were old, the tiles cracked, the mirrors over the basins foggy at the edges. Myrtle herself was absent, presumably in her preferred U-bend, which Harry was honestly grateful for. He looked at the sinks. The castle sense was active and specific in here, pointing down, pointing through the floor, through the specific architecture of the oldest plumbing system in Hogwarts, which went deeper than anything built in the last 4 centuries. He walked along the line of sinks until he found the one that was different. Heavier. The copper pipe underneath had a serpent engraved in it, small and easy to miss. He looked at it and spoke. The Parseltongue came without thought, the way language always came, pulled up from the Slytherin inheritance fully formed, the right sounds for the right instruction. He said, "Open." The sink moved. Not the whole bank of sinks, just this one, dropping cleanly away and revealing the entrance to a pipe large enough to fit a person, descending at an angle into the dark below. The air that came up from it was cold and old and smelled of stone and snake and something darker underneath, the particular smell of a space that had been sealed for a very long time. Harry looked at it. He pointed his wand down into it, said "Lumos," at full intensity, and slid in. The slide was longer than expected, a considerable distance, curving and descending through the castle's foundations, past the dungeons and below them, through rock that hadn't been seen since Salazar Slytherin himself built this passage 1,000 years ago. Harry kept his wand lit and his eyes forward and his mind on the specific command structure Hermione had documented for him: dominant tone, single speaker, sustained attention. Basilisks responded to the Parseltongue of whoever had most recently bound them, but they could be rebound by a dominant signal from a stronger source. The key was clarity of intent communicated through the specific frequency patterns of Parseltongue command. He arrived at the base of the slide in a large, dark tunnel. Stone pillars, carved with serpent motifs. Water on the floor, shallow and cold. Ahead, more tunnel, the torches on the walls relit themselves as he moved, an enchantment tied to the Slytherin bloodline, clearly, responding to him the way the door in Gringotts had, the way the ring had, the way things made by Slytherin's hands did. He walked forward. The molted shed of a massive snake lay along the left wall, enormous, easily 20 feet of shed skin, the scale pattern preserved in the dried shed casing. Harry studied it as he passed. Big. Old. Healthy-looking in the way the shed scales indicated, no disease, no damage, a creature that had been living adequately in this space for a very long time. He came to a door. Stone, covered in serpents, sealed with the same Parseltongue mechanism as the sink above. He opened it and went through. The Chamber of Secrets was larger than he'd expected and more beautiful, and he gave himself exactly 5 seconds to appreciate it before moving on to the relevant concerns. It was vast, cathedral-scaled, the ceiling lost in shadow above towering serpent-carved pillars that lined a long central aisle. At the far end, a massive stone face, Salazar Slytherin himself, rendered in severe and ancient stone, the execution of a man who'd lived when art was used to communicate authority rather than sentiment. A shallow channel of water ran down the central aisle between the pillars, fed by some underground source. And curled at the base of Slytherin's statue, in a coil that took up most of the far end of the chamber, was the basilisk. It was magnificent. That was the honest, unavoidable assessment. 60 feet at least, probably longer, with scales the deep green-black of very deep water, moving slowly in its resting state with the specific self-contained grace of a creature that has never in its life had reason to be afraid of anything. Its eyes were closed. The moment Harry entered the chamber and its nose, which was considerably better than its eyes for detection purposes, registered him, its coils shifted and its head lifted, the size of a car, turning toward him. Harry stood still. He said, in Parseltongue, "I am here." The basilisk's response was not language in the human sense. Parseltongue with a basilisk was less vocabulary and more direct sensation, intention communicated through tone and resonance rather than words. What came back was, "Who?" "The Heir," Harry said, in the specific dominant frequency that Hermione's research had identified for binding commands. "The true heir. The blood of Slytherin." And then, because Parseltongue also communicated through sensation, he let the ring's resonant surface, let the Slytherin inheritance that lived in his blood radiate outward the way it had in Gringotts, that bone-deep hereditary signal that the basilisk's ancient instincts would recognize the way Harry recognized his mother's face in a photograph. The basilisk went still. Then, very slowly, it lowered its massive head until its chin rested on the stone floor. The posture of a bound creature recognizing its proper master. "Yes," Harry said. He stood in the Chamber of Secrets with Salazar Slytherin's basilisk lying in submission before him and felt the Slytherin inheritance settle deeper than it had ever settled before, not adding something new but completing a circuit that had been waiting 1,000 years for the right current. Then he dealt with the practicalities. The basilisk's name, communicated through sustained Parseltongue conversation that took nearly an hour, was something that translated approximately as eldest, the name Slytherin himself had given it when it was hatched, an acknowledgement of what the creature would become in time. Eldest had been in the chamber continuously since Slytherin's death, awake and dormant in rotation, rousing when called by a Parselmouth and returning to rest when the caller departed. Tom Riddle had called it 50 years ago. The current activation was different. Eldest had been partially woken not by a living Parselmouth but by something else. An object. A voice from an object that spoke Slytherin's tongue. Harry processed this carefully. A voice from an object. Not Quirrell, then, not directly. Something else was operating the chamber. Something that could speak Parseltongue through a written medium. "The object that spoke to you," Harry said. "Describe it." What came back was sensation rather than visual description. The basilisk perceived through heat and sound and smell and magical resonance rather than sight. The object had been small, flat, bound with old paper. It had smelled of a young human and of old, concentrated magic and of something darker underneath both. It had spoken in the Parseltongue of a boy who was no longer alive but whose voice had been preserved in the object. A diary. Tom Riddle's diary. Harry stood very still in the chamber while pieces assembled themselves. Voldemort was Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle had been a Hogwarts student 50 years ago. He had opened the chamber then, used the basilisk, killed Myrtle. And before he graduated, before he became Voldemort and the name Tom Riddle became mostly historical, he had made a diary into something that could preserve his 16-year-old self's memory, his personality, his Parseltongue. A fragment of his consciousness, embedded in an object. A Horcrux, the Merlin inheritance supplied quietly, from the deepest and most ancient level of Harry's accumulated knowledge. An abomination. A piece of a soul torn out and stored. Someone had brought that diary into Hogwarts this year. Someone had given it to a student, or a student had found it. Eldest had responded to the voice in the pages before Harry had arrived to override it with a living command. "Who gave you the command?" Harry said. "What did the human who carried the object look like?" The basilisk sensory memory supplied, small, young, female. Smelling of fear and confusion and the particular magical signature of someone being influenced, acted upon, controlled rather than controlling. A student. Being used. Unaware. Harry thought about the second-year Gryffindor students. About who had been near each petrification. About who had been absent, or distracted, or slightly not themselves in the past several weeks. Ginny Weasley, he thought. He looked up at the basilisk. "You will not harm students," he said, in the dominant command frequency. "You will not respond to the voice in the object. You will respond to me alone." "Yes," Eldest said, without hesitation or resistance. The binding was complete. The rebinding was cleaner than Harry had expected. Eldest had been waiting, he realized, for a real master, not an object's impression of one. The 16-year-old echo of Tom Riddle in the diary had been a pale approximation of the original, and Eldest had known it, had responded because it was all there was and not because it was sufficient. Harry turned and walked back through the chamber to the exit. He was back in Myrtle's bathroom by 2 in the morning. He sealed the sink. He sat on the cold bathroom floor for a moment, thinking. The diary. He needed to find the diary. Ginny Weasley was in danger, not from outside, but from inside, from whatever Riddle's preserved consciousness was doing to her, using her, draining her. The Horcrux needed to be destroyed. He went to Dumbledore's office. He knocked. There was a pause, then the door opened on its own, and Dumbledore was inside in his dressing gown with the expression of a man who had decided that if he was going to be woken at 2 in the morning it might as well be for something significant. "The Chamber of Secrets," Harry said. "I've been in it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down, Harry." Harry told him everything. The basilisk, the rebinding, Eldest sensory memory, the diary, the Horcrux, Ginny. He told it in sequence, without embellishment, watching Dumbledore's expression move through several stages, controlled alarm, genuine relief at the basilisk's rebinding, and then, at the word Horcrux, something Harry had never seen on Dumbledore's face before, he went briefly pale. "You know what a Horcrux is," Dumbledore said. "Merlin's inheritance goes deep," Harry said. "The theory appeared in my understanding about 3 months into first year. I've been hoping not to need it." He paused. "Voldemort made more than one, didn't he?" Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. "Yes," he said. "How many?" "I believe," Dumbledore said carefully, and Harry could hear the weight of years of private investigation in the word believe, 7, including himself. "Though I have confirmed only 2. He paused. "The diary is 1. There is a ring, a Gaunt family heirloom, that I believe to be another. I have been attempting to locate it." Harry thought about the Gaunt lordship. About the Gaunt vault in Gringotts, which he'd visited during his account review and found near empty but structurally intact. About the Gaunt family history, descended from Slytherin, reduced to poverty and obscurity, the last member being Tom Riddle's mother's family. The Gaunt ring, Harry said slowly, would be registered in the House Gaunt records. Dumbledore looked at him. "I have the House Gaunt records," Harry said. "I've had them since I was 6. He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I'll need to review them more carefully." "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice had a quality Harry hadn't heard in it before, the specific quality of someone asking a favor they're not sure they have the right to ask. "The Horcruxes. This is not a task I had intended to assign to anyone, let alone a 12-year-old student. I had planned, you'd planned to do it yourself, Harry said. Yes. With how long a timeline? A pause. Years, Dumbledore admitted. Perhaps decades. Harry looked at him steadily. I don't have decades, he said. The prophecy has a conclusion built into it. Voldemort will return in a body at some point. The diary confirms he's already working toward it, using students, using objects, looking for a way back. Every Horcrux he has is a delay. He kept his tone even, not urgent, just factual. I'd rather face him whole once than diminished pieces of him indefinitely. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. You are not, he said quietly, what I expected when I placed you with the Dursleys. No, Harry agreed. I imagine I'm not. I expected, Dumbledore said, with the honesty he'd gradually learned Harry required, someone who would need guidance. Direction. Someone whose power could be, he stopped. Shaped, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression acknowledged it without flinching. Yes. That was, not my finest thinking. He paused. Your mother would have had very pointed things to say about it. She sounds like she would have, Harry said. He stood up. I'm going to find the diary. Ginny Weasley needs it out of her hands and destroyed. Do you have anything that can destroy a Horcrux? Dumbledore stood as well and went to one of the cabinets, which required a complicated unlocking sequence that he performed without particular ceremony. He returned to the desk with a small bottle. Basilisk venom, he said. One of the few substances capable of destroying a Horcrux permanently. Given that you now have a basilisk, that would also work, Harry said. He hadn't thought of that yet. He made a mental note to discuss it with Eldest, specifically the possibility of a controlled venom extraction for future use. The basilisk would require something in return. Eldest communicated with the specific dignity of a creature that understood exchange. Harry could work with that. He took the bottle. Thank you. Harry. Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the door. The Horcrux in the diary, when you destroy it, the piece of Voldemort's soul in it will manifest. Likely violently. Likely with Tom Riddle's appearance as a 16-year-old. It will try to talk to you before it dies. Let me guess, Harry said. It'll claim that we're the same. Both orphans, both Parselmouth, both from unusual beginnings. Dumbledore's expression confirmed it. I'll bear that in mind, Harry said. He found the diary in Ginny Weasley's bag. This was not a heroic discovery, it was methodical work conducted over 3 days. He tracked the petrification locations, cross-referenced them with the routes Ginny took between classes, identified the windows when she was alone and slightly absent, the specific quality of someone who isn't entirely present in themselves. He watched. He waited. He noted the moments when she seemed to snap back into full clarity, which corresponded, he suspected, with the periods when the diary's influence receded. It could only drain and direct her so much at once. He approached her on a Thursday afternoon in a quiet corridor near the library, when she was alone and demonstrably herself, brighter eyes, more animation in her face, less of that slightly hollowed quality. Ginny, he said. She looked up. She'd been slightly wary of Harry since September, not because he'd done anything to her, he thought, but because first years developed complex feelings about second-year students who'd been sorted into all 4 houses, and Harry suspected she'd been carrying around a version of him based on Ron's reports that didn't quite match the actual person. I need you to give me the diary in your bag, Harry said. He kept his voice quiet and even, zero accusation in it. The one you've been writing in. I know you have it. I know it's not your fault. I'm going to destroy it and it's going to make you feel significantly better. Ginny stared at him. The things you wrote in it, Harry said. Whatever it wrote back. It's not real. It's not a person. It's a piece of something very dark dressed up in a 16-year-old's face, and it's been using you. He held out his hand. Give it to me. Something shifted in her expression. The the particular shift of someone who has been carrying a secret so heavy for so long that the offer to take it is almost physically relieving. Her hand went to her bag. She hesitated. "How do you know?" she said quietly. "I went into the chamber," Harry said. "The basilisk told me." "In its way." He kept his hand out. "You haven't done anything wrong. You were given something designed to deceive you." She took the diary out of her bag and looked at it. It was an ordinary-looking thing, small, black, TM Riddle stamped on the cover. She looked at it with the expression of someone who has recognized something they should have recognized a long time ago but couldn't, because the recognition was being suppressed. She put it in Harry's hand. Harry closed his fingers around it and felt the thing inside it immediately, dark and cold and watchful and very, very old in the specific way that things which should not have survived this long were old. "Tell Ron," Harry said. "If you want to. Or don't. Either way, this is over." She was already breathing differently. 2 breaths in and the hollowness was retreating from her face. She looked at him with huge brown eyes that were filling up with a mix of emotions he wasn't going to catalog for her. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Harry said, putting the diary in his own bag. "I still have to destroy it. That part might be slightly dramatic." He destroyed it that evening, in an unused classroom on the 3rd floor, with the basilisk venom Dumbledore had given him, 1 drop on the cover, which produced a reaction considerably more dramatic than implied by the word drop. The diary screamed. There was no other word for it, a high, tearing sound that wasn't quite sound, that resonated somewhere below hearing, and then a shape assembled from black smoke in the air above the burning pages and looked at Harry with eyes Harry recognized, from the Gaunt records and from the Ministry photographs. Tom Riddle, 16 years old, handsome and cold and furious and afraid. "Heir of Slytherin," the shade said. Its voice was wrong, too smooth, too constructed, the voice of someone who learned their own voice as a performance. "We are the same, you and I. You're the same age as my father was when Voldemort killed my parents," Harry said. "The metaphor doesn't quite land." The shade's composure cracked slightly. It hadn't expected that. It had expected, Harry could read it, awe, or revulsion, or the particular paralysis that came from facing something that claimed to be like you. "You have everything I sought," it said, the smooth voice getting harder underneath. "The houses. The power. The inheritance. I built mine from nothing, you destroyed everything you could have built from nothing," Harry said, and his voice was even and clear and completely without drama. "And now you're an echo in a burning diary." He let the venom do its work. "Goodbye, Tom." The shade came apart. Harry stood in the empty classroom while the diary turned to ash and the ash settled and the cold, dark thing in the room dissolved back into nothing. He stood there until the room was just a room again, dusty and quiet and unremarkable. Then he picked up his bag and went to find Hermione. She was in the common room. She looked at his face and then at his bag and then said, "Did it work?" "Yes," Harry said. "Are you all right?" He considered it honestly. "Yes," he said again. "I'm fine." He sat down. "Horcruxes are real and Voldemort made several of them, and I now need to talk to Dumbledore about a research project that's going to take most of the next several years." Hermione looked at him steadily. "I want to help with that." "I know," Harry said. "I mean it," she said. "Don't give me the specific advantage in this specific situation argument again. Horcrux research is theoretical work, it's not a basilisk, and I am absolutely better at theoretical research than Hermione," Harry said. She stopped. "I know," he said. "I was going to say yes." She closed her mouth. Opened it again. "Oh," she said. "Obviously I want your help," Harry said. "I'm not an idiot." She looked at him for a moment, and then she smiled, a real one, the kind she didn't always let out in public, fast and bright and entirely genuine. "No," she said. "You're really not. The mirror in Harry's pocket vibrated twice. He was out of his chair before the second vibration finished. He had it to his face and said, "Neville," and Neville's face appeared in the glass with an expression that was completely focused and not afraid, and said simply, "Quirrell is moving. 3rd floor, now." Harry was already at the portrait hole. "Harry," Hermione started. "Come if you want," Harry said, because the basilisk was dealt with and the specific advantage argument no longer applied. "But we need to move." Chapter 5. The Emperor's Court. The 3rd floor corridor smelled of dust and old magic and whatever enchantments Dumbledore had stacked behind the locked door, like a sequence of arguments against the inevitable. Harry moved fast but not reckless, the Gryffindor battle sense spreading ahead of him, reading the corridor's geometry, the positions of the portraits who watched him pass with expressions ranging from curious to alarmed. Hermione was half a step behind, wand out, breathing controlled. The castle was awake around them in the specific way it got when something significant was happening within its walls, a low structural hum, like a bell that had been struck too deep to hear but not too deep to feel. Neville was waiting at the corridor's entrance, mirror in hand, and fell into step without being asked. "How long ago?" Harry said. "For minutes," Neville said. "He went through the door. I came straight to you, I didn't follow him in." "Good," Harry said. "There was something wrong with him," Neville said. "His face. He looked different." Harry pushed the door open. The first chamber held the 3-headed dog, which was already unconscious, a harp playing itself in the corner, an enchantment Quirrell had activated on the way through. Harry looked at the harp, at the sleeping creature, at the trapdoor hanging open in the floor, and kept moving. What followed was a rapid transit through Dumbledore's layered obstacles, each one designed to slow rather than stop, because Dumbledore had clearly built this for a specific kind of intruder, and the specific kind of intruder he'd imagined was somewhat less comprehensively prepared than Harry. Devil's snare. Harry lit the room so bright it recoiled before it properly grabbed. Winged keys. Harry had the right one in under 40 seconds, the battle sense reading the flight patterns the way he read a snitch. The chess set was the only one that gave him pause, not because it was difficult but because it was beautiful, the pieces enormous and clearly sentient in the way magical constructs sometimes became after long habitation, and he spent a moment acknowledging that before routing them in 11 moves. Hermione solved the potion puzzle in the time it took Neville to read the riddle aloud. "Trolls already taken care of," Harry noted, stepping over the unconscious troll in the 7th chamber. "Dumbledore?" Hermione said. "Probably Quirrell, on the way in," Harry said. He had time. He moved to the final door. The last chamber was large and warm and smelled of stone heated from below. The mirror of Ariste stood against the far wall, tall, ornate, the gold frame carved with the reversed inscription that Hermione began decoding under her breath the moment she saw it. In front of the mirror stood Quirinus Quirrell, still as a pillar, staring into the glass. Not moving. Not reaching. Staring. Frustrated. Harry stepped into the room. "Hello, Professor." Quirrell turned. The transformation Harry had been tracking in increments since September was complete, the nervousness was gone, the tic was gone, the theatrical affectation of the frightened academic had been shed like the diary's snake skin, left behind somewhere between the 1st floor and this room. What stood in its place was someone with cold, flat attention and the quality of a person who has been a passenger in their own body for long enough that the passenger and the vehicle have developed a single purpose. "Potter," Quirrell said, and his voice was different. Still Quirrell's vocal mechanism but operated by something else entirely. "The turban," Harry said. "Is that where you're keeping him?" Quirrell's hands went to his head. Then, and this was genuinely strange, a quality of movement Harry had no previous reference for, his body turned to face the mirror while his head turned toward Harry, a dissociation that would have been disturbing if Harry had allowed it to be. Slowly, with deliberate theater, Quirrell reached up and unwound the turban. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was wrong in ways Harry's eyes tried to process and kept returning unsatisfied from. It was a face designed by something that understood faces only academically, a red-eyed, noseless construction that had the proportions of a human face and none of the life behind it. It opened its mouth and the voice that came out was the voice from the diary magnified and stripped of its youth. "Harry Potter," said Voldemort. "Voldemort," Harry said. "You are more than I expected," Voldemort said, in the tone of someone distributing a rare and pointed compliment. "The diary tells me you were thorough. I felt it destroyed. I felt the loss of it." The red eyes were moving over Harry with a specific attention, not tactical, something more fundamental. Something that was trying to categorize Harry and finding its categories inadequate. "And yet here you are. Not hiding. Not afraid." "Should I be afraid?" Harry said. "Every rational being should be afraid of me," Voldemort said, pleasantly. "You're a face on the back of a defense teacher's head," Harry said. "I've seen your teenage diary fall apart in an empty classroom. I've spoken to the basilisk you thought was yours." He held Voldemort's gaze without effort. "Afraid isn't the word I'd choose." The red eyes narrowed. Quirrell's body moved toward the mirror. "The stone," Voldemort said. "I need only what's in that mirror, Potter. You could walk away. You are too powerful to be a martyr for Dumbledore's causes. He built you up to be a sacrifice, surely you know that." "I know exactly what he built me up to be," Harry said. "I also know it doesn't apply to me. You chose the wrong target in 1981. You created a situation you didn't have the information to control." He took a step forward. "The prophecy existed because you acted on it. You made me what I am because you were afraid of what you might become." Voldemort was very still. "I know about the Horcruxes," Harry said. "All of them." This was a slight overstatement. He had confirmed two and had strong evidence for the existence of others, but he said it with complete conviction because the effect was more important than the arithmetic. "Diary's gone. The ring will be next. Then the rest of them, one by one, until there's nothing left to come back to." He paused. "This ends. Tonight or later. But it ends." "You are a child," Voldemort said. "I am the Imperator of 15 foundational houses," Harry said simply, "and I am telling you that your war is over. You just haven't died yet." Voldemort laughed. It was a real laugh, which was somehow worse than a villain's theatrical one, genuine, almost delighted, the laugh of someone who has found the most interesting problem they've encountered in decades. "Oh, you are magnificent," he said. "What a waste. What an extraordinary waste, you could have been." "Don't," Harry said. "Whatever you were going to say, don't. The offer doesn't interest me. The vision doesn't interest me. Power for its own sake is the philosophy of someone who was afraid to want anything specific." He watched Voldemort's expression. "What did you actually want, Tom? Before you decided wanting things was beneath you? Before you turned yourself into something that doesn't have wants anymore, just appetites?" The laugh stopped. The red eyes went flat and still in a way that was different from their previous flatness. This was the stillness of something touched in a place it had spent a very long time making untouchable. "Don't call me that," Voldemort said softly. "That's your name," Harry said. Quirrell moved, not Voldemort's deliberate motion but something faster, more desperate, a lunge toward Harry with hands that Voldemort intended to use as a weapon, and Harry sidestepped without thinking, the battle sense already having tracked the motion before it fully committed. Quirrell's hands closed on air. Harry caught Quirrell's wrist, not a combat grip, a steadying one, and what happened then was not something he'd planned or anticipated. The Peverell inheritance. Death magic, old and specific. The moment his skin touched Quirrell's, something moved through the contact in the wrong direction, not from Harry into Quirrell but out of Quirrell, or more specifically, out of Voldemort's presence in Quirrell, the parasitic occupation that had been destroying the host body from the inside for months. Death magic recognized the difference between a living thing and a thing that was feeding on a living thing. Quirrell screamed. The sound was Quirrell's, not Voldemort's, not the face on the back of the head, but Quirrell himself, somewhere underneath the occupation, experiencing something Harry couldn't fully parse from the outside but that looked and sounded like release. Like a thing coming free of something that had been holding it down. Voldemort's face opened its mouth and made a sound that was the opposite of Quirrell's, furious, sustained, and deeply afraid, and the presence in the room contracted and expanded once and then blew outward like a door opening to a gale, and Quirrell went limp, and Harry caught him, and the face on the back of Quirrell's head was blank skin again. Then Quirrell was on the floor and Harry was standing over him and the room was just a room. Dumbledore arrived 11 seconds later. Harry had counted. The headmaster came through the door at speed and stopped when he saw the room, Quirrell unconscious, Harry standing, Hermione and Neville at the threshold with wands drawn. His eyes moved over the scene with the rapid assessment of someone updating several conclusions at once. They landed on Harry. "The stone," Harry said. "It's still in the mirror. Voldemort's gone, not destroyed, gone, dispersed. He'll reform somewhere eventually. Quirrell needs immediate medical attention." He paused. "I may have inadvertently used Peverell Death Touch on him. The inheritance activated on contact. I don't know the full medical implication." Dumbledore was very quiet for a moment. Not in a bad way, in the way of someone who was genuinely processing something that had exceeded their framework. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," Harry said. "Hermione? Neville?" "Fine," Hermione said, from the threshold. Her voice was controlled and her wand hand was steady. She was watching Harry with the expression she used when she was filing an enormous amount of information for later processing and knew that now was not the time for the conversation she intended to have about it. Neville had his wand still out and was looking at Quirrell with an expression of compassionate severity, the face of someone who has made peace with the necessity of hard things while still finding them genuinely hard. Dumbledore levitated Quirrell with the care of someone handling something fragile. Then he looked at Harry one more time. "I think," he said, "that we are going to have a significant conversation tomorrow." "Yes," Harry said. "We are." That summer, Harry did not return to the cupboard. He told the Dursleys this with the specific quality of someone delivering a logistics update rather than issuing a challenge. He explained that he had houses, several of them, in fact, as the heir of 15 foundational wizarding dynasties, and that he intended to occupy one of them over the summer rather than Privet Drive, and that they were welcome to continue their lives exactly as they'd been living them, with the adjustment that he would no longer be doing the cooking. Uncle Vernon drew a breath for the kind of response that had worked, with varying degrees of success, for Harry's entire childhood. Harry looked at him. The breath came out quietly. He went to Potter Manor in Wiltshire, which had been in the Peverell Potter line since the 12th century and had been under a maintenance enchantment for the 10 years of Harry's absence, ticking over in the way that very old magical houses did, self-cleaning, self-repairing, waiting with the patient dignity of something that had been built to last and could see no reason to stop. The house was large. Harry walked through it on the first day and made practical decisions, which rooms to use, which to close up, what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. The library was the second thing he assessed after the structural integrity, and it was extraordinary, accumulated over 3 centuries of Potter and Peverell scholarship, with sections in Latin, Greek, French, and 2 languages he didn't yet fully read but would. He spent 3 days cataloging it before he did anything else. Hermione arrived on the 4th day, by flu, with a trunk that was clearly expanded internally and a look that said she'd been ready to come since the moment she'd gotten his letter and had spent the intervening days practicing the patience she normally found insufficient. She walked into the library and stood in the middle of it for 30 seconds without saying anything. "Yes," Harry said, from the ladder where he was returning a text to the upper shelf. "This is extraordinary," she said. "I know," he said. "The runic theory section alone, Harry," she said, with the tone she used for important things. He came down from the ladder. She was looking at him with the direct, unsentimental attention she used when she had something real to say and had decided to say it without navigation. Last year, she said. The chamber. Quirrell. Everything you knew that I didn't know yet. I'm not angry about the information differential, I understand the reasons. But I need you to promise me something. What? He said. That you don't start deciding unilaterally what I can and can't be involved in based on your assessment of the risk to me, she said. Not because I think I'm invincible. Because I think the decisions should be ours. She paused. We. Not you. We. Harry looked at her. You're my best friend, she said, in the same tone she used for everything else, clear and direct and without performance. That means I'm in this. All of it. Not the parts you decide are safe enough. All right, Harry said. All right? She looked slightly thrown by the lack of resistance. You're right, he said. I overcorrected for the basilisk situation and applied it too broadly. It won't be a recurring problem. She studied him for a moment, looking for the caveat. There wasn't one. Good, she said, and turned to the nearest bookshelf with an expression of focused happiness. Now show me the runic theory section. Neville arrived 2 days later, by night bus, with Trevor in a pocket and a slightly disheveled quality that suggested he'd been arguing with his grandmother about something and had won, which was evidenced by the fact that he was here. The three of them spent 6 weeks at Potter Manor working through Horcrux research, Hermione leading the theoretical framework, Harry contributing the Merlin inheritance's deep knowledge of soul magic, Neville doing what Neville had increasingly proven himself extraordinary at, finding the practical human detail in abstract theory, asking the question that cut to the actual point. He was the one who said, on the 3rd week, if Voldemort made 7, and 1 was the diary, and 1's the ring, what are the other 5? And where does he keep them? Harry had been working on that since February. He had, by the end of summer, confirmed through cross-referencing the Gaunt records, the Peveril historical documents, and several volumes of magical object registry from the Ministry's restricted archive, accessed via a letter from Harry citing Foundational House authority, which the Ministry had processed with the specific quality of an institution that knows it doesn't have grounds to refuse but is deeply unhappy about that the ring was at the Gaunt shack in Little Hangleton. A locket was likely in Slytherin's name, current location uncertain. A cup with the Hufflepuff crest, origin Hepzibah Smith's collection, stolen and hidden. A diadem, Ravenclaw's, lost. And one more, something he hadn't identified yet, something that the Merlin inheritance suggested was closest to Voldemort himself, hidden within Hogwarts. He also had, by the end of summer, a 3rd visitor. Luna Lovegood arrived at Potter Manor on a Wednesday morning in August with a rucksack over one shoulder and an expression of serene and particular curiosity, escorted by no one, invited by, as far as Harry could work out, no one either. She walked up the front path and knocked on the door, and when Harry opened it she looked at him with eyes the color of a clear sky and said, "Hello. You have a blibbering humdinger in your east garden. Don't worry, they're harmless. You just might want to move the sundial." Harry looked at her for a moment. "Come in," he said. She came in. She walked through the house with the relaxed attention of someone who had been places before and found each new place equally interesting for different reasons. She stopped in the library doorway, looked at the bookshelves, and then looked at Harry. "You're not what the magazines say," she said. "No," Harry agreed. "They say you're either destined to save the world or secretly building a dark empire depending on which one you read." She tilted her head. "You're just trying to do the thing properly, aren't you?" Harry looked at her with the assessment he applied to most things. What he saw, genuine intelligence operating through an unconventional framework, a pattern of perception that was orthogonal to standard thinking rather than defective, the specific quality of someone who had decided to trust their own observations over received wisdom and had been doing it long enough to be good at it. Also, entirely unafraid of him. Completely comfortable in the silence. "Yes," he said. "That's about right." "I can help," she said. "I notice things other people don't. I know you've been tracking the Horcruxes." "How do you know that?" Harry said. Neville told me, she said. Harry was going to have a brief conversation with Neville about operational security. You said the humdinger is harmless, Harry said. How do you know it's actually there? How do you know it isn't, she said. A pause. Fair point, Harry said. Third year started with the announcement that Hogwarts would be hosting Dementors at its borders for the year, due to the escape of Sirius Black from Azkaban. Harry heard this on the Hogwarts Express from a prefect making announcements through the corridor and registered two separate reactions. First, genuine interest in the Dementors as creatures from the academic perspective of the Peverell death magic inheritance, which had a specific and complex relationship with the beings. Second, a more immediate reaction to the name Sirius Black. He knew about Sirius Black. He'd made it his business to know, third year being Sirius's 12th year in Azkaban and the case against him being something Harry had reviewed thoroughly in the Peverell Legal Archive, which contained documentation on the House Black cadet line, specifically the branch that included Sirius Orion Black, Harry's godfather, whose godparent registration was filed in the Gringotts records. Harry had a godfather. His godfather was in Azkaban for 12 murders and the betrayal of Harry's parents, convicted without trial. Without trial. Harry had checked that 3 times, because it seemed like the kind of error no one would actually make, and yet the records were clear. Sirius Black had never been tried. He had been arrested, he had been imprisoned, and the legal proceeding that should have happened between those two events had not occurred. Whether through oversight or design, it had simply not happened. He said this to Hermione on the Express. She went very quiet. Then she said, "He's your godfather?" Registered in the Gringotts foundational records, Harry said. And he was never tried, she said. Never, Harry confirmed. That means the conviction isn't legally valid, she said, working through it in real time. You can't imprison someone for life in the wizarding justice system without a trial. That's ministry law, not just common sense. The Wisengamot procedures are clear, Harry said. Yes. He paused. There's also the matter of Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew is dead, Neville said. He was killed in the street when Sirius, a finger was found, Harry said. One finger. And a rat. Pettigrew was an unregistered animagus. He looked at Neville. A rat animagus. The compartment went quiet. Ron's rat, Neville said slowly. I don't know that yet, Harry said. I'm not going to make that claim until I have evidence. But you think it, Hermione said. I think the mathematics suggest it very strongly, Harry said. I intend to verify it. How? Luna asked, from the corner of the compartment where she'd been reading the Quibbler upside down for the past 20 minutes with the expression of someone who had been following the conversation with full attention despite appearances. The new defense teacher is Remus Lupin, Harry said. He was a close friend of my father. He was James Potter's friend and Sirius Black's friend and, by all historical accounts, Peter Pettigrew's friend. He'll have information. He paused. He's also a werewolf, which Dumbledore is clearly aware of and has chosen not to disclose to the student body, which I find standard, Hermione said, with a note of resigned accuracy. Standard, Harry agreed. The Dementors were, as Harry had anticipated, responsive to the Peverell inheritance in a way no standard magical defense would have predicted. When the Dementor boarded the train, the cold hit, the darkness, the specific pulling sensation of something reaching for the warmest parts of memory, Harry felt the Peverell death magic rise to meet it not defensively but recognizingly, the way you recognize a predator in a shared ecosystem. He said, very quietly and very clearly, no, and the Dementor stopped. Just stopped. It didn't flee. It didn't attack. It went still in the doorway of the compartment with the specific quality of a creature that has encountered an authority structure it doesn't understand but nonetheless registers. Harry looked at it steadily. Move on, he said. It moved on. Hermione, who had gripped the edge of her seat with both hands, slowly released her grip. Neville looked between Harry and the doorway. Luna, who had not looked up from the quibbler, said thoughtfully, I thought they'd be taller. Professor Lupin, who had been asleep in the corner and had awoken at the cold, was awake now and watching Harry with an expression that had gone through surprise and arrived at something much more complex. He was a thin man who looked like he'd had a difficult relationship with sleep for a very long time, with the specific worn quality of someone who carries something heavy and has learned to carry it efficiently. His eyes, meeting Harry's in the aftermath of the Dementor encounter, had the quality of someone seeing something they had been told to expect but had not actually prepared for. You look like your father, Lupin said quietly. I've been told, Harry said. But you knew him. You can tell me how accurate that is. Something moved through Lupin's expression. He said, you have your mother's eyes. James never, he stopped. He could not have done that to a Dementor. That was something else entirely. Peveril inheritance, Harry said. Death magic has a specific relationship with beings that exist on the threshold. He paused. You're Remus Lupin. You were my father's best friend. Alongside Sirius Black. The name landed the way it always landed in conversations about that era, specific weight, specific flinch, the conditioned response of people who'd built their understanding of the name around the received story. Yes, Lupin said carefully. I'd like to talk to you, Harry said. About what actually happened on the night Peter Pettigrew died. The longest pause. After we reached the school, Lupin said, and his voice had made a decision that Harry could hear clearly. Come to my office after dinner. The meeting with Lupin that evening lasted 3 hours. Harry brought Hermione, with Lupin's agreement. Lupin had looked at Hermione once with the specific recognition of someone identifying the person in the group most likely to hold the facts accountable, and nodded. What emerged over those 3 hours was, Lupin's conviction, 12 years strong and unshaken, that Sirius had not betrayed James and Lily Potter. His silence about it, which he'd maintained not because he believed Sirius guilty but because he'd believed, in the wreckage of grief and survival, that silence was the only thing he had left to give. His certainty about Pettigrew's guilt, based on 12 years of replaying a story whose official conclusion he'd never accepted. And one more thing, Pettigrew had been the Weasley family's rat. Harry processed this with the specific quality of a hypothesis confirmed. Scabbers, Harry said. Lupin nodded. Ron Weasley doesn't know, Harry said. No, Lupin agreed. He'll need to, Harry said. Pettigrew being alive changes everything about Sirius's case. An animagus faking his own death, framing the man he actually betrayed the Potters to, that's not just exculpatory. That's the complete inversion of the conviction. He looked at Lupin. Sirius needs a trial. A real one, with evidence. Getting Sirius out of Azkaban, Lupin began. Is a legal problem, Harry said, and I'm the legal heir of 15 foundational houses with 400 million galleons in combined assets and a fundament treaty that gives me political standing in the Wizengamot. He kept his voice even. Sirius was never tried. The trial that didn't happen can still happen. It has to be formally requested through the Wizengamot by someone with recognized standing. Lupin looked at him. That's you, he said, slowly. That's me, Harry said. The legal action took most of the year. Harry filed the formal petition in November, petition for formal Wizengamot hearing, Sirius Orain Black, submitted by Harry James Potter, Imperator, Foundational Houses, Peveril, et al. Pursuant to Wizengamot Charter Section 14, Article 3, Right of Trial, through Sharpfang, who handled the submission with the specific satisfaction of a goblin who had been waiting for Harry to start using the foundational authority for something with real teeth. The ministry's response came in 10 days, which was faster than Harry had expected and confirmed that the petition had hit something significant. The response was signed by Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, and it was carefully worded, not a refusal, because a refusal would acknowledge that the trial hadn't happened, which they couldn't afford to acknowledge, but not an agreement either. It was written in the specific language of institutional delay, under review. subject to scheduling. Further correspondence forthcoming. Harry wrote back the same day. The petition cites a statutory violation of Wisengamot Charter Section 14. The Charter does not contain a scheduling provision for statutory violations. Please advise as to the legal basis for delay. 3 days. The Ministry responded, procedural review in progress. Harry wrote, please specify which procedure is being reviewed and its expected duration. 5 days. Interdepartmental coordination required. Harry wrote, I have engaged a solicitor of Goblin law who advises that interdepartmental coordination does not constitute grounds for delay under Section 14. I look forward to receiving a trial date at your earliest convenience. Should a date not be forthcoming within 30 days, I will be requesting a Wisengamot session under emergency charter provisions, which require a response within 72 hours. I hope this clarifies the timeline. The trial date arrived within 2 weeks. It was, Harry would later think, the first time he'd used the foundational authority for something purely personal. All the previous applications had been administrative, estate claims, account access, Hogwarts accommodations. This was different. This was taking something that had been wrong for 12 years and making it right, not because it was politically strategic, not because it advanced any agenda, but because Sirius Black had done nothing wrong and had been in a cell on an island in the North Sea for 12 years because no one with sufficient standing had thought to ask the right question. The trial happened in February. Harry testified. Lupin testified. The critical moment was Pettigrew himself, who Lupin had located, not in Ron Weasley's pocket, because Ron's rat had, the previous autumn, escaped the castle in the commotion of an early Dementor breach and not returned, a disappearance that Harry had been privately watching. Pettigrew had surfaced in a wizarding settlement in Wales, still in rat form, still hiding. Lupin had found him because Lupin was a tracker with 12 years of motivation and Harry had given him the specific location intelligence from the Marauder's map, which had turned up in a Weasley twin confiscation pile and reached Harry through a chain he was not going to fully document, that confirmed a specific magical signature. Pettigrew's testimony, given under Veritaserum, lasted 40 minutes. The Wisengamot chamber was silent for most of it. At the end, the vote took 4 minutes. Sirius Black walked out of the Ministry on a Thursday afternoon in February of Harry's 3rd year, into grey London winter light, thin and blinking and slightly unsteady, wearing Ministry-issued robes that were too big for him, accompanied by a waiting Remus Lupin who put a hand on his shoulder and said nothing because nothing was what was needed, and by Harry. Sirius looked at Harry on the Ministry steps with the eyes of someone trying to reconcile a mental image held for 12 years against a present reality. Harry let him look. He was used to being looked at by people who had a version of him in their head that needed updating. "You look like your father," Sirius said, eventually, in a voice that 12 years of Azkaban had made rough and careful at the same time. "Everyone says that," Harry said. "Though apparently I have my mother's eyes." Sirius laughed. It was unpracticed, the laugh, like something that had been packed away for storage and hadn't been taken out in a long time, rusty at the hinges. But it was real. She would have, he stopped. Swallowed. She would have thought this was hilarious, you know. That you had to get him out of prison. She'd have said of course and meant it about both of you. "Tell me about her," Harry said. They walked together into the grey afternoon, and Sirius talked. By 3rd year's end, the political landscape had shifted visibly. The trial, and Harry's successful navigation of it, had done what large visible acts of political competence tend to do. It had attracted attention from parties who had been watching and waiting to see if Harry was going to be what the ring said he was or what the mythology said he was. The distinction between those two things was, apparently, significant. The first formal contact came from France. Beaux Batons, acting as a proxy, sent a delegation of 3 to Hogwarts in May under the guise of a cultural exchange. The actual purpose, which Harry knew before they arrived because Sharpfong had flagged the travel registry, was to open dialogue about the Arkharren house inheritance, whose original lineage was partly French in origin, and the implications of Harry's foundational authority for several disputed French magical territories. He met them in Dumbledore's office, with Dumbledore present because he had specifically requested Dumbledore's presence and Dumbledore had been clearly interested in why. The lead delegate was a woman named Amelia Beaulieu, 40, elegant, with the specific quality of someone who was representing not themselves but an institution and knew exactly where the line between those two things ran. She spent the first 10 minutes of the meeting feeling out what she expected to find, which Harry could tell was a precocious child with impressive assets, and then recalibrated within the next 5 minutes and spent the rest of the meeting working with what was actually in front of her. He liked her for that. The outcome of the meeting was a formal opening of diplomatic correspondence between the foundational houses and the French ministry, which technically had no precedent and required Sharpfang to draft an entirely new category of legal document, which he did with visible relish. More practically, it established that the Arkharrenhaus territories were Harry's by hereditary right and not subject to French ministry administrative claim, which resolved a dispute that had been generating paperwork since 1887. The second contact was less formal and more significant. Victor Krum arrived at Hogwarts in September of fourth year, the Triwizard Tournament having been announced in August with Beauxbatons and Durmstrang's participation, and Durmstrang's delegation headed by Igor Karkaroff, who was sweating slightly more than could be explained by climate, and sought Harry out within 48 hours of arrival. Not as the school's champion designate. Personally, Krum was 17, 2 years older than Harry, and had the quality of someone who had been famous since early adolescence and had developed a specific relationship with fame that involved treating it with considerable suspicion while being entirely comfortable with the actual self that existed underneath it. He sat across from Harry in the library, both of them reading, because Krum actually read in the library rather than using it as a social location, which Harry respected, and said, without preamble, the Durmstrang foundational records show a Pendragon line correspondence with the House Emery's archive. Harry looked up. "I'm the current Durmstrang foundational archivist," Krum said, in a tone that was slightly defensive about the fact that a famous international Quidditch player was also a library archivist. "It is a hereditary post. I did not choose it." "I know," Harry said. "I've been trying to reach the Pendragon Emery's correspondence for 2 years. Sharpfang said it was in foreign holdings." "It is," Krum said. "I can make it available." They looked at each other with the specific quality of two people who are in the process of rapidly establishing that they are going to get along. "Hermione," Harry called, across 3 rows of shelves. "I'm already making notes," she called back. Krum looked in the direction of her voice. "She is your best friend," Harry said. "She is very intense," Krum said, with apparent admiration. "Yes," Harry said. "It's a feature." The Triwizard Tournament unfolded with the specific quality of events that have been planned around assumptions that are then confounded by reality. Harry was not eligible as a champion, he was 14, and the age limit was 17, and he did not put his name in the goblet, a fact which Dumbledore established immediately and completely when a 4th name came out of the goblet bearing Harry's name. The name was not Harry's handwriting. Harry pointed this out. Bartemius Crouch Sr., who had gone grey by the time the name emerged from the goblet, said that it didn't matter, the magical contract required, the magical contract is with the person who submitted the name, Harry said, in the Great Hall, in front of everyone, at 14 years old, to the assembled delegations and staff and students. "I didn't submit my name. Someone submitted it for me, which is fraud, which voids the contractual obligation." He held up the parchment bearing his name, which the goblet had produced. "I'd also like to note that the handwriting is Bartemius Crouch Jr.'s, who is documented as deceased but who, based on certain features of the handwriting analysis I conducted this afternoon against the Crouch Family Legal Archive, to which I have access as part of the Selwyn House documentation, which the Crouch family swore to in 1923, is considerably more likely to be alive and present in this castle." The Great Hall was very, very quiet. Moody, who was not Moody, had gone extremely still. "I'll be talking to Professor Dumbledore and the Auror office," Harry said, conversationally. "Tonight, I think." Given the urgency. He folded the parchment. Sat back down. Helped himself to more potatoes. Across the table, Hermione was watching him with bright eyes and the expression she used when she was suppressing a smile by applying it to other purposes. Neville, on his left, said quietly, "The handwriting analysis." "When did you?" "This afternoon," Harry said. "While everyone else was in the tournament announcement ceremony." "You weren't at the ceremony?" "I was in the library," Harry said. "You were in the library," Neville said, "during the tournament announcement." "I had a theory to test," Harry said. The tournament seemed like it would be announced adequately by the ambient noise. Neville looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who had long since made peace with the fact that his best friend had a particular relationship with conventional participation. Then he went back to his dinner. Crouch Jr. was extracted from the castle that night, in a confrontation that was brief and decisive. Dumbledore, Harry, McGonagall, and 3 Aurors who arrived via emergency flu summons. The Polyjuice situation resolved itself when Harry pointed out the specific magical signature discrepancy between Crouch Jr. and the real Moody's documented auric profile, information from the Auror office records that the Peveril archive had, for historical reasons, maintained since the 19th century. The real Moody was in a chest in his own office, alive and extremely annoyed. Crouch Jr., under Veritaserum, confirmed Voldemort's location, his plan, and the list of Death Eaters currently operating in active service. Harry sat in Dumbledore's office afterward while the Aurors processed everything, and Dumbledore looked at him across the desk and said, "He was planning to use the tournament to transport you to Voldemort." "I know," Harry said. "If you had been declared champion, I wasn't going to be declared champion," Harry said. "I was going to contest the contract on the grounds I stated in the hall." He paused. "Did you consider that Moody might be Crouch Jr.? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I had concerns," he said. "I was watching. I had not yet reached the level of certainty required to act," Harry said, without accusation. "Yes. In future," Harry said, "share your concerns earlier. With me." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "We do better when we're working with the same information." Dumbledore looked at him, the way he sometimes looked at Harry, with the specific quality of a very old, very intelligent person recalibrating their relationship with certainty. "Yes," he said. "I believe we do." Chapter 6, The Last Throne. Voldemort returned on a Tuesday in June. Harry knew before the prophet announced it, before Dumbledore called the emergency staff meeting, before the Ministry began its frantic and ultimately pointless attempt to control the information. He knew because the Horcrux map he and Hermione had been maintaining since 3rd year, a dense, annotated document that lived in a warded leather case in the Potter Manor library and had been updated 17 times over the past 3 years, went from 5 confirmed items to 4 confirmed items at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and the item that vanished from the list was the Nagini entry. The snake. Voldemort's snake. Harry was in the common room when it happened. He felt it through the Peveril inheritance, a death, specific and significant, the particular resonance of a Horcrux vessel being destroyed from a distance, which meant someone else had done it. Someone who knew about the Horcruxes and had found the snake. He looked at the map. He looked at the remaining entries, the Ravenclaw diadem, which he'd located in the Room of Requirement 2 months prior and had been preparing to destroy. The unknown object, the one he'd been circling for 2 years, the one the Merlin inheritance kept pointing toward and he kept arriving at the same impossible conclusion about and rejecting because the conclusion was not acceptable. He opened his trunk and took out the warded case and sat on the edge of his bed and did the arithmetic he'd been refusing to do for 2 years. The Horcrux count, diary, destroyed 2nd year. Ring, destroyed by Dumbledore 4th year, the old man's blackened hand afterward explained and understood in this context. Locket, recovered from a cave with Dumbledore in October and destroyed by Sirius in November, Sirius who had spent his post-Azkaban year rebuilding himself into someone formidable and had earned the assignment. Cup, destroyed by Hermione in February after a 3-month retrieval operation that Harry was never going to let her be falsely modest about. Diadem, ready. Nagini, apparently done by someone unknown. That was 6. Voldemort had made 7 Horcruxes. The 7th, the Merlin inheritance had been saying with increasing clarity for 2 years, was not in an object. It was not in a location. It was not something Harry could find in a vault or retrieve from a cave. It was in Harry. He sat with this for a long time. Not in shock, he'd known it, or rather he'd known the probability of it for long enough that the confirmation was more the end of avoidance than the beginning of understanding. The night Voldemort had tried to kill him, the killing curse rebounded and Voldemort's soul had been blasted apart, a piece of it fragmenting and attaching itself to the only living thing in the room. An accidental Horcrux. An unintended one. The most significant one, because it was inside the person Voldemort needed to be destroyed by. He turned this over. Examined it from all available angles. The traditional resolution, Dumbledore had been building toward, Harry could see it now, the architecture of the plan Dumbledore had been slowly constructing since Harry's first year, the plan he'd never quite articulated because articulating it required saying you will need to die. The plan was elegant in the way that terrible things sometimes were. Harry walks into Voldemort's power willingly, the Horcrux in Harry is destroyed, Harry dies, Voldemort is mortal again, someone finishes the job. Clean. Complete. The prophecy's term satisfied. Harry thought about this plan. He thought about Ragnarok, choosing him at age 6 with the specific certainty of someone who had read the longer arc. He thought about 15 dynasties of accumulated knowledge sitting in his blood. He thought about the Deathly Hallows, the cloak at the bottom of his trunk, the stone which he had not sought but which had appeared in the ring Dumbledore destroyed and which Dumbledore had, he now suspected, passed to him in the snitch at the first Quidditch match of his first year, the Elder Wand whose ownership chain he'd been tracking through Goblin records for 2 years and which currently resided with Dumbledore. He thought about the Peverell inheritance and what it actually meant. Not symbolically. Technically. Death magic. The Master of Death, the title, the state, the condition of having all 3 Hallows, was not a metaphor. It was a specific magical state, documented in Peverell primary sources that Harry had read thoroughly, that involved a relationship with death not as an ending but as a negotiated domain. The soul fragment. The killing curse that had bounced. The protection his mother's sacrifice had built into him. He thought for 2 hours. Then he went to Dumbledore. The headmaster was awake. Of course he was. Dumbledore at this stage of the year was rarely not awake, the weight of his accumulated knowledge and its implications having converted most of his nights into extended cognition sessions. He was at his desk when Harry came in, and he looked up and went very still with the specific stillness of someone who can read a face and has just read one. "You know," Dumbledore said. "I've known for a while," Harry said. "I've been working on whether I need to do what you've been building toward." "Sit down," Dumbledore said. "I'll stand," Harry said. Not confrontationally. He just needed to be standing for this. "Tell me what you know about the Master of Death." A long, careful silence. "The legend," Dumbledore began. "Not the legend," Harry said. "The technical documentation. I have the Peverell primary sources. I know what it says. I want to know what you've concluded from your own research." Dumbledore took off his spectacles and set them on the desk, and without them he looked older and somehow more honest, the scholarly instrument removed and the actual man present. "I concluded," he said slowly, "that it might be possible. That the union of the 3 Hallows in the hands of a true Peverell heir created a condition that was, more than symbolic. I concluded that the death such a person experienced, if they experienced it in possession of all 3, might be, not final." "Might be," Harry said. "I have never been certain," Dumbledore said, and the admission cost him something visible. "I had the theory. I had the Peverell documentation. I also had," he stopped. I also had the knowledge that I was constructing a plan that required a child to walk into death, and I was aware that my certainty about the outcome was being shaped by my need for the outcome to be what I wanted it to be. He looked at Harry directly. I did not trust my own reasoning. Because I wanted you to survive. Harry looked at him. I know, Dumbledore said. That is perhaps the most honest sentence I've said to you in 5 years. I wanted you to survive, and I was aware that my wanting was interfering with my thinking. So I held the plan in reserve and kept gathering information and did not tell you because telling you meant committing to it, and I was not ready to commit to a plan I wasn't certain about. He paused. It was also, truthfully, cowardice. Yes, Harry said. It was. He didn't say it harshly. But you're telling me now. You're standing in my office at midnight having clearly already worked most of this out, Dumbledore said. There didn't seem to be much point in further delay. Harry almost smiled. He went to the window and looked out at the dark grounds. The lake was black and still. The forbidden forest was a darker black against the night sky. I've been in contact with Eldest about venom extraction, he said. We've destroyed 5 Horcruxes and the diadem is ready. Nagini's gone. Do you know who destroyed it? Severus, Dumbledore said. He located the snake through channels I will let him explain in his own time. He has been operating in a position that has required considerable sacrifice, and I have not acknowledged it as I should have. Snape. Harry processed this, cross-referencing the past 5 years of Snape's behavior against the framework of someone maintaining a cover at enormous personal cost, and found that it recontextualized several things in ways that made a different picture. I'll talk to him, Harry said. He won't welcome it, Dumbledore said. I know, Harry said. I'll talk to him anyway. He turned from the window. Voldemort knows about the Horcruxes, or he will soon. When the soul pieces start to disappear, he'll feel it. The diary he knew about immediately. The others, he paused. He'll move. He'll want to face me before I get to the last one, which means I need to control the timing. What are you proposing? Dumbledore said. I'm not walking into his hands, Harry said clearly. I'm not appearing in a graveyard or a forest on his schedule. I'm calling him here, on my ground, on my terms. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I'm invoking the Imperial authority. Dumbledore sat back in his chair. The full authority, he said slowly. That would require the political notification, the gathering of the sworn houses. I know what it requires, Harry said. I've been preparing the documentation for 18 months. Sharpfang has the filing ready. The sworn houses are already on notice. I've been in correspondence with their representatives for 2 years. He paused. When I invoke the Imperial authority, it means any challenge to the Imperator is a challenge to all 15 houses simultaneously. Any oath-breaking, any attack, any assassination attempt is not just a crime against me, it's a declaration of war against a structure older than the Ministry, older than Hogwarts, older than almost everything currently standing in the magical world. He looked at the ring on his right hand. It means Voldemort doesn't face a boy. He faces an institution. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. And the Horcrux in you, he said finally. I'm going to deal with it, Harry said. How? The Hallows, Harry said. I have the cloak. You have the wand. The stone is in the snitch you gave me first year. I found it in October. He watched Dumbledore's expression confirm it. All 3 in the hands of a Peveril heir. The Master of Death doesn't die when they choose to die. That's what the Peveril documentation says. Not that they can't be killed. That they have a choice in it. He paused. I'm going to let Voldemort cast the killing curse at me. I'm going to let it destroy the Horcrux in me. And then I'm going to come back. You are going to come back, Dumbledore repeated. Yes, Harry said. You're certain. I'm certain enough, Harry said. Which is more than I usually have and more than you had when you built your version of the plan. A very long silence. The difference, Dumbledore said carefully, between your version and mine is that yours is built on evidence you've actually examined rather than hope you've dressed up as evidence. Yes, Harry said. That's the difference. Dumbledore picked up his spectacles. Put them back on. What do you need from me? The Elder Wand, Harry said. When the time comes. And Snape, I need to know what he knows. All of it. I'll arrange it, Dumbledore said. He stood. Harry. He paused, and what crossed his face then was something that had nothing to do with strategy or planning or the accumulated weight of impossible decisions. I am sorry, he said. For the years I spent treating your life as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be trusted. Harry looked at him. The apology was real, he could tell the difference, had been able to for years. I know, he said. Thank you for the stories about my parents. Dumbledore sat back down after Harry left, in the quiet of his office, and Fawkes made a low sound from his perch, and the headmaster looked at the portraits of his predecessors, some watching, some deliberately looking away, and sat with the particular quality of someone who has spent a very long life being the smartest person in most rooms and has finally, completely, made peace with being the second smartest in this one. Harry met with Snape the following morning. He came to Snape's office before breakfast and knocked, and Snape opened the door with the expression of someone who had been expecting this and had decided that expectation was not the same as preparedness. They looked at each other in the doorway for a moment. Nagini, Harry said. Come in, Snape said. What followed was not a warm conversation. It wasn't a cold one either. It was two people who had spent 5 years in a complicated dance around the truth of their situation, both of them aware the dance was happening and neither of them ready to stop it until now. Snape talked. Not with the ease of a man unburdening himself, with the precise, controlled delivery of someone translating from a language they usually kept entirely interior. He'd been Dumbledore's spy from the end of the First War. His motivation was not political conviction, not institutional loyalty. It was Lily Potter. It had always been Lily Potter. Harry sat with this. She was your friend, Harry said. She was the best person I knew, Snape said, and the simplicity of the sentence was what made it true. No decoration. Just the fact of it. I look like my father, Harry said. That's been difficult for you. Snape looked at him. The dark eyes were doing the thing they occasionally did, not warm, but present in a different way, the analytical surface briefly not dominant. You look like James, he said. You are nothing like him. Tell me which parts of that are a compliment, Harry said. All of it, Snape said, which cost him something visible and was therefore clearly true. She would have wanted you to still be here when this is over, Harry said. I think she would have wanted that very specifically. Snape said nothing. I want you to still be here when this is over, Harry said. Whatever Voldemort thinks your role is in his plans, whatever he's told you to do, tell me now and we'll build around it. What Snape told him then changed several things. The full scope of Snape's cover, the Death Eater network intelligence he'd been feeding Dumbledore for years, and, most significantly, Voldemort's current location and the name of the primary Death Eater moving his operations, Bellatrix Lestrange, who was coordinating the gathering of remaining Death Eaters at Malfoy Manor. Harry thought about Malfoy Manor. About Draco, who had spent 5 years evolving slowly and visibly from a weapon into a person and who was currently at home for the Easter holidays with his parents in a house being used as a Dark Lord's operational headquarters, which was not a situation any 15-year-old deserved. Draco, Harry said. Is not a Death Eater, Snape said. Yet. Voldemort is, applying pressure. Harry made a decision. I'm going to offer the Malfoys safe harbor under foundational house authority, he said. Not because I trust Lucius Malfoy or have any particular warmth for him. Because Draco is 15 and his mother and father are going to get him killed by proximity if something doesn't change the geometry. He paused. The offer will be politically useful as well. A Malfoy accepting imperial authority is a significant defection from Voldemort's social base. But that's secondary. Snape looked at him with the expression he'd been developing since second year, the one that acknowledged, without pleasure, that Harry was right. Harry invoked the imperial authority on the first day of June. The filing went through Gringotts at dawn. By noon, every magical household in Britain, every embassy of a foreign magical government, every sworn house representative had received the formal notification via their institutional owl networks. The goblins had their own, ancient and reliable, built on relationships that predated the postal system by 8 centuries. The notification was brief, clear, and in the specific legal language of the Fundament Treaty that left no interpretive ambiguity. Let it be known that Harry James Potter, Imperator of the 15 foundational houses, has invoked the full authority of imperial standing under the Fundament Treaty of 943 CE. All sworn house allies are called to acknowledge. All parties in conflict with imperial authority are formally notified that such conflict constitutes a declaration against all 15 houses simultaneously. A gathering will be held at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry on the 3rd day of June. All those who stand for the magical world's future are welcome. All those who stand against it will be met accordingly. The Ministry's response was, predictably, chaotic. Fudge issued a statement calling the invocation irregular and unprecedented, both of which were true and neither of which constituted a legal objection. The Wizengamot convened an emergency session that Harry had anticipated and had prepared Sharpfang to address remotely, the goblin presenting the legal documentation with an efficiency that left the Wizengamot's legal team visibly uncomfortable. The invocation was valid. It was legal. It was older than the Ministry by 9 centuries. The Malfoys arrived at Hogwarts on the 2nd of June. Narcissa Malfoy came first, ahead of her husband, which told Harry several things about who was actually in charge of that decision. She was elegant and pale and carried herself with the practiced composure of someone who had been managing impossible situations her whole life, and she walked into the Hogwarts entrance hall and looked at Harry with eyes that were simultaneously assessing and, underneath the assessment, profoundly relieved. "My son," she said, without preamble, "is safe here," Harry said. "As are you." "I meant what the notification said." He paused. "You'll need to provide the Ministry with anything they ask about Voldemort's operations. That's the condition." "Agreed," she said, immediately, which confirmed that she'd already decided and the confirmation was the easy part. Draco arrived behind his mother. He looked at Harry with the expression he'd been developing over 5 years, the expression of someone who had been handed a script for their life before they were old enough to consent to it and had been slowly, painstakingly, learning to improvise. "I know I was a prat," he said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "I'm not, I don't want to be on his side," Draco said. The honesty was effortful and clearly not performed. "I never wanted to be on his side. I wanted to be on the side that wasn't going to get my family killed." "That's this side," Harry said. "Welcome." Draco's expression did something complicated and then settled. Neville, who had been standing near the door with the quiet readiness that was his default state now, caught Harry's eye and gave the very small nod that meant "I'll take care of him," and moved to stand with Draco, because Neville understood what it was to be a person who had spent years being handled instead of known and knew how to make the distinction feel real. They came from everywhere on the 3rd of June. The sworn house allies, families who had been in formal alliance with one or more of the 15 foundational houses for generations, some for centuries, arrived through the morning in ones and twos and small groups, until the Great Hall and the grounds and the corridors were full of people Harry had corresponded with and had never met. People who had been watching the invocation from a distance and had decided that watching was no longer adequate. Victor Krum arrived with the Durmstrang delegation and immediately went to stand with Hermione, who had been managing the arrival coordination with a clipboard and an expression of intense focus that was her version of completely at home. Amelia Beaulieu came from France with 6 Beauxbatons representatives and shook Harry's hand with the directness she'd demonstrated in every correspondence and said, "The Arcaran territories are fully committed." Sirius, who had spent the past year and a half becoming someone Harry recognized as what he might have been without 12 years in Azkaban, vivid and quick and genuinely funny, and underneath all of that, a man of considerable courage, arrived from Potter Manor, where he'd been coordinating with Lupin and a network of former Order members who had, in the year since the Ministry legal battles, been operating with rather more clarity of purpose than they'd had under their previous structure. Lupin at his side. Tonks, whose hair was cycling through colors too fast to track. Mad-Eye Moody, the real one, who looked at Harry with one natural eye and one magical one and said, "Constant vigilance," with the tone of someone who knows full well the person they're saying it to doesn't need to be told but says it anyway because it's the shape of their relationship. McGonagall had organized the teachers and the older students. Flitwick was at the ward controls. Sprout had the greenhouses on a specific operational footing she hadn't described, but that resulted in the grounds outside the school perimeter having several new and very aggressive plant features. Snape was at a position Harry had specified, which Snape had argued about and then accepted, which was the pattern of all their interactions and had become its own kind of functional working relationship. Luna found Harry in the early afternoon, in the brief window of quiet between the arrival coordination and the thing itself, and stood next to him on the steps looking out at the gathered people on the grounds and said, "It's a lot of people." "Yes," Harry said. "Are you scared?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. He paused, trying to find the accurate word. "Ready. I've been working toward this since I was 6 years old." "Scared doesn't quite fit." "Good," she said. "Fear makes you either too careful or not careful enough. Ready is better." She looked at him sideways. "You should tell Hermione and Neville what you're planning to do." "About the Horcrux." He looked at her. "They should know," she said. "Not because they can prevent it. Because they should know." He went to find them. He told them in the library, the Hogwarts library, between the charms reference section and the restricted stacks, because this was where they'd solved most of their problems over the past 5 years and it felt right to use it for this. He told them both, completely, the Horcrux in him and what it meant and what he was going to do about it and why he believed he was coming back. Hermione's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: alarm, assessment, the specific focused concentration of someone applying their most rigorous thinking to an incoming problem, and then arrived at a stillness that was not acceptance exactly but was the face of someone who has looked at the evidence and cannot find the flaw in the conclusion. "The Peveril documentation," she said. "You've read it." "Several times," Harry said. "With fresh eyes each time." "And you're certain?" "Certain enough," he said, which was what he'd said to Dumbledore and was the truth. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "The Hallows need to be on your person. All 3, at the same time, before he casts." "I know," Harry said. "The cloak and the stone you have," she said. "The wand, Dumbledore's giving it to me beforehand," Harry said. "Tonight." She nodded. "Twice." The motion of someone filing and confirming simultaneously. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him, which was not something Hermione did lightly or without consideration, and he understood that it was her version of saying everything she'd decided not to say because she trusted the evidence and trusted him and had concluded that crying was not going to improve the evidence. He held on briefly. Neville, when he'd heard everything, was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to be standing where I can see you." "Neville, not to intervene," Neville said clearly. "I know I can't intervene. I'm going to be standing where I can see you because you should have someone who can see you." He met Harry's eyes with a steadiness that had nothing borrowed about it anymore, nothing propped up, just Neville Longbottom at 15 years old, entirely himself. "And because when you come back I want to be the first one to tell you that you were right." Harry looked at him. "All right," he said. "Voldemort came at dusk. He didn't come alone, of course he didn't. He came with the Death Eaters who had not defected or been captured or decided that the geometry had changed sufficiently to reconsider their positions. Perhaps 30 of them, in the long shadows of late afternoon, gathered at the edge of the Hogwarts wards. Bellatrix at his right hand, her particular brand of devotion having survived everything. But the Death Eaters ran into the wards. Harry had spent 2 months with Flitwick systematically reinforcing the Hogwarts ward structure, working from the Ravenclaw inheritance and from Merlin's own foundational theory, building not just defensive layers but specific response protocols. The wards didn't just hold, they identified, classified, and applied customized resistance to each incoming signature. Bellatrix hit the outer ward and was flung back 30 feet with the specific force of a 1,000-year-old magical system that had been significantly upgraded and had very clear opinions about people it recognized. Voldemort passed through. He passed through the outer ward and the secondary ward and the tertiary ward, and each one slowed him slightly without stopping him, because Voldemort was not a simple problem and Harry had never pretended otherwise. By the time he reached the inner ward boundary, he had slowed to a walk, and the magic required to hold himself together against the accumulated resistance was visible, a visible effort, a cost. Harry was waiting at the inner ward boundary. Just Harry. No one else, at this specific spot. Everyone else was at the positions he'd specified, which served both the defensive function and the other function, the one only Harry and Dumbledore and his 3 closest people knew about. Voldemort stopped 10 feet away. They looked at each other across the boundary, in the last light of a June evening, with all of Hogwarts behind Harry and a diminished army behind Voldemort and the accumulated weight of 15 years of history between them. Up close, in a body, Voldemort was wrong in all the ways Harry had expected from everything he'd read and all the ways he hadn't expected until now. He was tall. His presence was real in the way that very old and very dark magic was real, you felt it on your skin and slightly behind your eyes. The red eyes had a quality in person that was different from the diary shade, different from the back-of-head face in the 3rd-floor corridor. These were the eyes of a man who had made himself into something else and spent 30 years discovering that the something else was not what he'd imagined. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. Tom Riddle, Harry said. The red eyes flickered. You keep using that name. It's yours, Harry said. You gave up everything else, your father's name, your mother's name, the name you were given, the person you might have been. The name you built is a performance. Tom Riddle is what's left. He didn't move from the boundary. This is over. You invoked a 900-year-old treaty to call this gathering, Voldemort said, with something that was close to genuine appreciation. A political framework older than the Ministry. I'm told the sworn houses numbered 47 responses. 51, Harry said. 51, Voldemort repeated. Impressive. And still you stand here alone. I'm not here to fight you with an army, Harry said. That's not what this is. He stepped across the ward boundary, forward, into the open ground between them. This is you and me. It was always going to be you and me. I'm just making sure it happens now, with the terms I choose, rather than later on yours. Voldemort tilted his head. You have a plan. I have several, Harry said. The one I'm executing tonight ends this. You intend to die, Voldemort said, reading something in Harry's stillness that Harry allowed him to read. Interesting. Dumbledore's plan, executed on your terms. You've known about the Horcrux in you. For 2 years, Harry said. And you think dying will, a pause. The red eyes doing their own calculation, rapid and precise. The Hallows, Voldemort said, and his voice changed registers. All 3. You have all 3. Yes, Harry said. The Master of Death, Voldemort said slowly. I sought them myself once. I had the wand. He looked at Harry with an expression that was, Harry recognized it and found it unexpectedly clarifying, not hatred. Not contempt. Something that had once been hunger and had calcified into grief for an opportunity permanently lost. And you simply, were them. From birth. From birth, Harry agreed. Then what? Voldemort said, are we doing here? If you're going to die and come back and destroy the last fragment of my soul, if the prophecy resolves tonight, why the invocation? Why the 51 houses? Why the assembly? Harry looked at him. Because the war doesn't end with you, Harry said. It ends when the structures that allowed you change. When the ministry that imprisoned innocent men without trial and called it justice changes. When the blood purity politics that gave you a recruitment base for 40 years change. He paused. I called 51 houses here as witnesses. Every magical government in Europe has a representative on these grounds tonight. When this ends, when you're gone, there's going to be a moment, a very brief moment, where the structure is open and what fills it matters enormously. I intend to be there for that moment with every relevant party already in the room. He met Voldemort's eyes. You thought you were fighting a boy with a scar. You were actually fighting 9 centuries of accumulated institutional authority, and I wanted you to know that before the end. Voldemort was very still. You are extraordinary, he said, with something in it that was not a compliment from a friend but might have been, in a different life, from a different version of this person. What a waste. You said that before, Harry said. Through the diary. And I mean it more now, Voldemort said. Then he raised his wand. Harry raised his. He let the Peveril inheritance surface fully, not as a weapon, not as a defense, but as a state of being, the way the Peveril documentation described it, the acceptance of death as a domain rather than an ending, the acknowledgement of mortality as the price of meaning rather than the punishment for living. He felt the cloak at his shoulders, the weight of it like water. He felt the stone in his pocket, warm and present. He felt the Elder Wand, given to him by Dumbledore 2 hours ago, in his wand hand. He felt the Horcrux, the piece of Tom Riddle that had been living in him since he was 15 months old, flicker and pulse at the magic rising around them, as if it recognized what was coming. Avada Kedavra, Voldemort said. Harry said nothing. He let it come. The green light hit him and the world went white. The white resolved, slowly, into something like a train station but not quite, a place between places, immeasurably still and immeasurably bright, with the quality of something that had been exactly this for longer than time and would remain it after. Something lay in the corner of the space, small and ruined and barely formed, making a thin sound that was less alive than almost alive. The fragment of Voldemort's soul. In the open. Exposed. Harry looked at it. He did not go toward it. He did not do anything with it. He simply let the Peveril inheritance hold the space, let the Master of Death state do what the documentation said it did, create the condition where death was a threshold rather than a wall. He thought about Ragnarok. He thought about his mother, who had stood between a killing curse and a 15-month-old and had not survived it. He thought about Lily Potter's eyes, which he apparently had, and her mind, which he hoped he partially had, and her way of seeing through things, which he recognized in himself and was finally ready to say he was proud of. He thought, I'm coming back now. He came back. He came back to the Hogwarts grounds in the dark of a June night with the sounds of battle around him and Voldemort standing 10 feet away and the Death Eaters who had made it through the ward breach fighting the assembled sworn houses and order members across the grounds. He lay still for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to feel what was different, which was, the Horcrux was gone, and without it the magic in him was, enormous and entirely his own, every inheritance running clean and unimpeded, like a river with a dam removed. He got up. Voldemort had felt it, the death of the last fragment of his own soul, destroying itself on the impact of the killing curse. He was pale as old bone, paler than he'd been, and for the first time in Harry's direct experience the composure showed a crack that had nothing theatrical about it. He was mortal. Completely, for the first time in decades, mortal, with a 15-year-old getting to his feet in front of him. Hello, Harry said. I said I'd come back. Voldemort cast 4 spells in rapid succession, with the speed and power of someone who had been doing this for 50 years and was not diminished by mortality in any way that mattered in the immediate second. Harry moved through them, not dodging, moving with the battle sense full engagement, three-dimensional space reading perfectly, each curse missing with the precision of something that had been calculated before it arrived. The fifth spell he caught on the Elder Wand and redirected, not back at Voldemort but into the ground between them, a detonation that cracked stone and threw both of them back a step. Expelliarmus, Harry said. Not because it was the most destructive option. Because it was his, had always been his, the spell that said I don't need to kill to end this. The Elder Wand wanted him to use it, he could feel that, the old instrument's appetite for the decisive gesture, and he used exactly the spell he chose rather than what it wanted, which was its own kind of mastery. Voldemort's wand left his hand. He stood without it, and without the Horcruxes, and without the fragments of soul that had made him what he'd been for 30 years, and he was Tom Riddle again whether he wanted to be or not, a man who had made himself into something terrible to avoid being something ordinary, and had succeeded so completely that he destroyed everything the ordinary thing might have become. Harry thought, in the brief second before what happened next, that it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. The killing curse Voldemort cast without his wand, wandless, desperate, the raw magic of a dying man, hit the wards that had resealed behind Harry when he'd crossed back through. The wards, built by Ravenclaw's heir on Merlin's foundational theory, absorbed it with the specific competence of a magical system that had spent 1,000 years learning what to do with exactly this kind of force. Voldemort's last magic rebounded. Not redirected by Harry. Not choreographed. The universe, in this one instance, proving entirely capable of providing its own symmetry. Tom Riddle died for the last time, on the grounds of a school he had once wanted to call his own, in the middle of a summer night, surrounded by people who had gathered because someone had thought the gathering mattered, who had prepared instead of reacting, who had built something rather than waited for something to be destroyed. The Death Eaters fell apart quickly after that. Some fled. Some surrendered. Bellatrix fought for considerably longer than was rational, because Bellatrix had never been connected to rational in any relevant sense, and was eventually immobilized by a combined effort involving Sirius, Lupin, and McGonagall operating with the specific efficiency of people who had agreed on a plan beforehand and were executing it. Harry stood in the middle of the grounds and breathed. Neville was at his elbow within 30 seconds. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, exactly as he'd said he would, and Harry turned and looked at him and Neville said, "You were right." "I know," Harry said. "That's not actually as insufferable as it sounds," Neville said. "No," Harry agreed. Hermione arrived from across the grounds at a run and stopped in front of him and looked at him with the eyes that catalogued everything, and he let her look, let her verify with all the particular thoroughness she applied to things that mattered, until she was satisfied. "The Horcrux," she said. "Gone," he said. She let out a breath. Luna appeared at his left as if she'd been there the whole time. She was looking at the sky, which was beginning to lighten at the east horizon, the very first gray-blue of something changing. "There'll be a lot of work now," she said pleasantly. "The Ministry will be in chaos. The Wizengamot will need restructuring. All those houses expecting something." She tilted her head. "It'll be interesting." "Yes," Harry said. "It will." Sirius came across the grounds at a loping walk and pulled Harry into a hug with the specific force of a man who had been waiting 12 years to be someone's family and had fully committed to it. Harry held on. "Your mother," Sirius said, against the top of his head, she would have, I can't even, I know," Harry said. Dumbledore was standing at the entrance to the castle when Harry finally walked back across the grounds. He was simply standing there, watching, not coming forward. Harry walked to him. "You came back," Dumbledore said. "I told you I would," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "You did." He looked out at the grounds, at the gathered people, the secured Death Eaters, the activity that was already beginning to organize itself, Hermione's clipboard having reappeared from somewhere and being applied to the logistics of aftermath with determined efficiency. "What comes next," he said carefully, "is going to require leadership." "Yes," Harry said. The Imperial authority is invoked and the witnesses are present, Dumbledore said. This is the moment you described. The structure is open. I know, Harry said. What will you build? Dumbledore asked, and it was not a rhetorical question. It was a genuine one, from a man who had been building things his entire life and was genuinely curious what the next builder had in mind. Harry looked out at the people on the grounds. At Neville talking to Draco with the patient steadiness he brought to most things. At Victor Crumb and Amelia Beaulieu and Sharp Fang, who had arrived at some point in the night with a delegation of goblins, because of course he had. Sharp Fang had always understood that this moment was what the whole long project had been pointing toward. At McGonagall organizing the castle's response with her typical ruthless efficiency. At Sirius and Lupin standing side by side in the growing light like something that had been wrong for 12 years finally correctly aligned. At Hermione, who looked up from the clipboard and caught his eye across 30 feet of early morning grounds and gave him the look she used for things that were going to require significant work and were completely worth it. Something that doesn't need me to hold it together, Harry said. Something that runs on its own principles, not on its own fear. He paused. Something my mother would have found adequate. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular quality of a man for whom admission had always been expensive and who had, over the past 5 years, been learning to pay it more willingly, I think, he said, she would have found it rather more than adequate. The sun came up over Hogwarts on the 4th of June, and the light hit the castle the way it hit it every morning, indifferent to what had happened the night before, consistent and honest, the kind of light that showed everything clearly and apologized for nothing. Harry stood in it and felt, for the first time since he was 6 years old in a cupboard under the stairs, entirely and completely free. Not from responsibility. Not from work, of which there was an extraordinary amount. Not from the complexity of being who he was, which was not going to simplify. Free in the only way that actually mattered, on his own terms. Exactly where he'd chosen to be. He went inside. There was work to do.